I have one question. Where are you listening from tonight? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy falling asleep to these calm but chilling tales, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, close your eyes and let the forest take you. My name is Henry Callan, and when this incident occurred, I was at Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona in 2009. I am a fifth-generation Cherokee on my mother's side. I served overseas 3 times, but I started working as a park ranger because I thought the desert could calm the noise in my head. The park stretches across arid landscapes dotted with fossilized tree trunks, where rust and purple hues are common. Tourists typically drive through, snap photos at scenic spots, and leave before nightfall. Most don't see what the desert hides once darkness falls and shadows stretch long enough to cover footprints. That April, the wind only carried sand. Drought had separated the clay and the terrain like puzzle pieces, and the painted desert stood skeletal beneath the boundless sky. My work area was the northern region. I patrolled rural trails densely lined with fallen trees. Every morning, I would drive the perimeter roads, follow the tracks, and warn visitors about federal penalties for taking fossils. I would write up the reports every evening. A quiet day. No incidents. Until Claire Riley walked into the visitor center with a camera bag slung over her shoulder and a smile that didn't match the weariness in her eyes. She introduced herself as a freelance photographer chasing a story on forgotten highways. Route 66 fragments still cut through the park, crumbling asphalt swallowed by sage and time. Claire wanted shots of petrified logs framed by abandoned roadbeds, something about America's lost arteries. I gave her the standard speech. Stay on marked trails, carry water, watch for rattlesnakes. Never turn your back on the horizon because distances lie out here. She nodded, but I saw that glaze photographers get when they're already composing shots in their head. I should have pushed harder, should have made her repeat the rules back to me. But the visitor center was packed with a school group, radios squawking about a broken-down RV on the South Road, and I let her go with a map and a warning to be back before sundown. She wasn't. At 7:47 p.m., her rental sedan still sat alone in the Blue Mesa Trailhead parking area. Engine cold. Doors locked. I radioed dispatch, ran her plates, and started a preliminary sweep of the trail. The path wound through hills striped like layer cake, bentonite clay glowing pink and gray under my flashlight beam. Boot prints led out from the lot, size 7 or 8, tread pattern consistent with hiking shoes. The prints followed the main trail for half a mile, then veered off toward a ridge overlooking the teepees, a cluster of eroded badland cones that look like clay teepees stacked by giants. I climbed the ridge, lungs burning in the thin air. At the top, I found her camera. Canon digital SLR, lens cap off, battery dead. It lay on a flat slab of petrified wood, placed deliberately, not dropped. The viewfinder was clean. No cracks, no sign of struggle. I powered it on, using my spare battery pack, and scrolled through the last images. Sunset over the teepees. Close-up of a rainbow-hued log. A selfie of Claire grinning, wind whipping her dark hair. Then the final shot. Gray static. No, not static, movement. Dust swirling in a vortex, backlit by dying sun, and at the center, a shape. Blurred. Humanoid. Then nothing. I called it in. By midnight, a search and rescue team from Holbrook arrived with dogs and thermal drones. We combed the area until dawn, finding nothing but coyote tracks and the skeletal remains of a mule deer. Ribs bleached white, scattered across a wash. The dogs hit a scent trail leading east into the wilderness area, then lost it where the ground turned to bedrock. Claire Riley had vanished as cleanly as morning frost under desert sun. Her rental company reported no emergency contacts. Her social media showed a pattern: solo traveler, national parks, empty landscapes. The last post was from the Grand Canyon 3 days earlier. Some roads only go one way. Marcus Tate and the district chief pulled me into his office the next afternoon. He was Navajo, built like a fire hydrant, with eyes that had seen too many seasons of dust and bureaucracy. He slid a file across his desk. Incident reports dating back to 1987. 12 missing persons inside park boundaries. Hikers, photographers, a geology student, an elderly couple. Most were found within 48 hours, dehydrated or disoriented. 3 were never found. In each case, personal items were recovered, placed in odd locations. A wallet on a stone cairn, a hat folded neatly beside a trail marker, a wedding ring balanced on a petrified stump. Tate's voice stayed flat. Pattern could be coincidence. Could be people staging disappearances. Could be the desert just takes what it wants. I asked about the camera placement. He shrugged. Coyotes don't arrange cameras. Neither does wind. File it under unknown contributing factors and move on. We've got a senator's kid coming through tomorrow with a film crew. Need you visible, professional, not chasing ghosts. I took the file anyway. That night, alone in my trailer on the edge of park housing, I read every report twice. The missing 3 had all disappeared in April. All were solo travelers. All carried photography equipment. The last one, a man named Thomas Bennett, vanished in 2003. His camera was found on the same ridge where I'd found Claire's. Final image on his memory card. Swirling dust in a shape that could have been shadow or stone or something standing upright. I didn't sleep. At 4 a.m., I drove back to the Blue Mesa trailhead and hiked to the ridge under starlight so bright it hurt. The petrified wood felt cold under my palms, silica crystals catching moonlight like trapped fire. I sat where Claire must have sat, framing the teepees in my mind. The wind picked up, carrying a smell like old copper and dry bone. I heard no footsteps, saw no movement, but the air pressure changed, thickening, and my ears popped like I'd dropped elevation. The stars dimmed. Not clouds. Something else. A presence patient and vast, watching from the folds of ancient stone. I descended at first light, legs shaking. At the trailhead, someone had scratched a message into the dust on my truck hood. 3 words in block letters. She went willing. I radioed Tate. He sent a deputy to take photos, but wind had already blurred the edges. The deputy, a young Hopi woman named Kai, asked if I'd noticed anything unusual during my shift. I told her about the camera, the dust, the file. She glanced at Tate, then back at me. My grandmother says the desert remembers everything, every footprint, every broken promise. Petrified wood isn't dead, Ranger. It's waiting. Search operations scaled down after 72 hours. Claire's name joined the list. Investigation ongoing. No evidence of foul play. Likely cause: environmental exposure. I kept working my patrol routes, but the desert felt different now. The tourists I guided seemed too loud, their laughter brittle against the silence pressing in from the wilderness area. At night, I'd see headlights on closed roads, distant and wavering, gone when I drove closer. Footprints appeared on trails I'd walked hours before, leading nowhere, ending at canyon edges or vanishing into hardpan. 2 weeks after Claire disappeared, a package arrived at the ranger station addressed to me. No return label. Inside, a thumb drive and a handwritten note on motel stationery. Callan, you're asking the right questions. Check the archive room. Look for Vasquez. She knows. I booted the drive on my personal laptop. Video files, dashcam footage from patrol vehicles dating back to the 90s. Grainy, time-stamped clips showing the same phenomenon. Dust vortices forming at dusk near petrified logs. Shapes moving inside the swirl. Human-sized, then dispersing as if they'd never been. I found Elena Vasquez living in a double-wide on the outskirts of Sanders, 30 miles west. She'd retired in 2005 after 18 years as a backcountry ranger. Now, she bred Australian shepherds and sculpted petrified wood into abstract shapes she sold at Flagstaff galleries. She invited me in without asking why I'd come, poured black coffee, and sat across a table scarred by decades of carving. "You found another camera," she said. Not a question. I nodded. She sighed, fingers tracing a chip in her mug. "It's the wood, Ranger, not the forest. The wood." She explained slowly, choosing words carefully. Petrified logs aren't wood anymore. Silica replaced organic tissue molecule by molecule over millions of years, creating perfect stone replicas. But the park sits on a convergence zone. Aquifers below, magnetic anomalies in the bedrock, and something older. Indigenous histories speak of places where the boundary between what is and what was grows thin. The petrified forest is one. People who linger too long at those boundary sites, especially at dusk, sometimes slip through. Not dead, not kidnapped. Translated. Vasquez had documented 17 cases during her tenure. Each time, belongings were left as markers. Cameras captured the transition, dust and light. Then absence. I asked the obvious question. Where do they go? She shook her head. That's the wrong question. Ask instead, when do they go? The wood remembers being alive 200 million years ago. Maybe the people who touch it, who sit with it, who open themselves to it, they remember too. They step into the past the wood carries, or the past steps into them. She handed me a carved piece, smooth and cold. Rainbow hues swirled in frozen grain. Take this. If you're going back to that ridge, take this. Balance against balance. Don't go empty-handed. I drove back to the park as the sun dipped low, painting the painted desert in shades of rust and bruised plum. The carved wood sat heavy in my jacket pocket. At the Blue Mesa trailhead, I parked beside a maintenance shed and hiked the ridge trail one more time. The wind had died completely. No birdsong, no insect hum, just my boots crunching clay and the low thrum of blood in my ears. At the ridge top, I placed Vasquez's carving on the slab where I'd found Claire's camera. Then I sat, waited, watched the sun bleed out. The dust began to swirl 20 minutes after sunset. No wind to explain it. The vortex formed slowly, pulling particles into a column that spun counterclockwise, glowing faint orange from some interior light. I felt the air pressure drop again, ears popping, and the smell of copper flooded my nose. Inside the swirl, a figure took shape. Slender, female, moving with purpose, not panic. She turned, and for a heartbeat I saw Claire's face, not frightened, calm. She raised one hand, fingers splayed, then stepped backward into the spinning dust. The vortex collapsed. Silence returned. The carved wood was gone. Only a smooth depression remained where it had rested, as if the stone had swallowed it whole. I stood on shaking legs and descended in full dark, using my headlamp to navigate switchbacks. At the trailhead, my truck sat undisturbed. On the hood, another message scratched into dust. Thank you. I drove back to the ranger station, filed no report, and requested a transfer. Marcus Tate approved it without questions. I spent my last 2 weeks closing out patrol logs and training my replacement, a kid from Flagstaff who thought the desert was empty. I didn't correct him. Some knowledge is a weight you carry alone. Before I left, I returned to Elena Vasquez's trailer. She was carving a new piece, something angular and sharp. I told her what I'd seen. She nodded, as if I'd confirmed weather predictions. "Did you feel fear, Ranger?" I thought about it. No, just loss. And something older than fear, respect, maybe. She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. "Then you did right. The desert gave you a glimpse because you were willing to see. Most people aren't. They walk through the park, take their pictures, and never realize they're standing on a threshold. The ones who linger too long, who sit too still, who open themselves too wide, they cross it. Not all at once, but eventually." I asked if Claire could come back. Vasquez set down her chisel. "Come back implies she's somewhere else. She's in the wood now, Ranger. The wood that remembers being trees. The wood that remembers rivers and rain and a world so different from this one that our minds can't hold the shape of it. She's not suffering. She's just elsewhere. Elsewhen. And the desert, in its way, has accepted another offering. It always has. It always will." She handed me the piece she'd been carving. Sharp edges, smooth faces, colors that seemed to shift in the light. "Keep this one. Reminder that some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, but they're not walls either. They're doors. And doors go both ways." I drove out of Arizona 3 days later, the carved wood wrapped in a wool blanket on the passenger seat. My transfer took me to Denali, as far from desert as I could get. But on still nights when the auroras paint the sky and the air tastes of ice and distance, I sometimes catch a scent like copper and old bone. And I wonder if Claire Riley is wandering stone forests under a Triassic sky, camera in hand, capturing a world that existed long before humans named the stars. I wonder if she's happy there. If happy even applies to a state of being so removed from the linear time we cling to like a raft in flood. The Park Service closed the Blue Mesa Trail for 2 months, citing erosion concerns. When it reopened, new signs warned visitors to stay on designated paths and respect the fragility of the landscape. No mention of missing persons. No mention of cameras or carvings or dust that swirls without wind. Just bland bureaucratic language about preservation and penalties. But the rangers who work there now, the ones who've been there long enough to see patterns, they know. They watch the sunset crowds thin out. They patrol the ridge at dusk. And sometimes, when the light is just right and the air goes still, they see figures moving in the teepees. Humanoid shapes that flicker like heat mirages, there and gone. Walking roads that no longer exist on any map. I lasted 8 months in Denali before the dream started. Not nightmares exactly. More like memories that didn't belong to me. I'd wake remembering the weight of humidity in a forest that had no name. The sound of creatures that hadn't walked the earth in epochs. The texture of bark that would become stone over slow millennia. My hands would ache as if I'd been carving, though I owned no tools. The carved wood Elena Vasquez had given me sat on my nightstand, and some mornings I'd find it moved, rotated, repositioned, though I lived alone and kept my door locked. In November, I received an email from Marcus Tate. Subject line, "Thought you should know, eh?" The message was brief. Another disappearance. Solo hiker. Male. Age 42. Name, David Marsh. Last seen on the Agate Bridge Trail. Camera found. Same ridge. Same dust. I stared at the screen for 20 minutes before I replied. "I'm coming back." Tate met me at the Holbrook airstrip in early December. The desert had turned cold, scrub crusted with frost, sky the color of old denim. He looked older, thinner, like the wind had worn him down to essential elements. We drove to the park in silence until he pulled into a scenic overlook and killed the engine. "You don't have to do this, Callan. You're not assigned here anymore. This isn't your jurisdiction. I watched a raven circle overhead, wings black against pale sky. Claire Riley's camera is still in evidence lockup. David Marsh's will join it. How many more before someone admits there's a pattern? Tate's jaw tightened. Pattern doesn't mean explanation. Could be a serial killer staging scenes to look supernatural. Could be mass hysteria. Could be people who want to vanish finding an excuse. The Park Service's job is to manage land, not chase folklore. I turned to face him. You read Vasquez's reports. You know what's happening. Why are you pretending it's normal? He stared through the windshield at the painted hills, silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. Because the alternative is admitting that the land we're supposed to protect is protecting something else. Something that takes people. And if I admit that, Ranger, I have to close the park, shut down roads, end jobs, kill a local economy that barely survives. So, yes, I pretend. We all do. He handed me a manila folder. David Marsh's file. Divorced, unemployed. Last social media post. Going somewhere I can finally breathe. His rental car held 3 weeks' worth of camping gear. His camera's final images showed the same progression. Landscape. Close-up. Dust. Shape. Static. I closed the folder. I need access to the evidence room, and I need to go back to that ridge. Tate sighed. I can give you 72 hours as a consulting resource. After that, you're a civilian, and I can't protect you from liability. Don't make me regret this. The evidence room sat in the basement of the visitor center, a climate-controlled space lined with metal shelving. I signed in, noting I was the first person to access this section in 3 years. Claire's camera sat in a plastic bin alongside her map, water bottle, and a small notebook I hadn't seen before. I opened it carefully. Journal entries. Dates spanning 2 weeks before her disappearance. Most were mundane. Gas prices, motel reviews, photography notes, but the last 3 entries stood out. April 7th, the wood here feels different, like it's watching. Driver at the gas station warned me about staying past sunset. Said people get confused in the desert, walk in circles, die of thirst 20 feet from their cars. He's wrong. It's not confusion. It's invitation. April 9th. Dreamed I was a tree. Roots deep in mud that would become stone. Time moved differently. Centuries passed like breaths. I could feel the weight of sediment burying me, the slow replacement of fiber with mineral. It didn't hurt. It felt like relief. April 11th. Tomorrow, I'm going to the ridge Elena told me about. She said if I meant to cross, the wood will recognize me. If not, I'll just have pretty pictures. Either way, I think I'm ready to stop running. I photographed every page, then checked David Marsh's effects. His camera bag also contained a notebook. Fewer entries, but the last one mirrored Claire's. December 4th. Met a woman at the trailhead. She didn't give her name, just handed me a carved piece of petrified wood and said, "If you're looking for a door, this is a key." I laughed. She didn't. I'm keeping the carving. It feels warm, even though stone shouldn't hold heat. 2 people. 2 carvings. Both from Elena Vasquez, though neither mentioned her by name. I drove to Sanders that evening, arriving as the sun set behind distant mesas. Elena's trailer showed no lights. Her truck was gone. A neighbor, an elderly man tending a propane heater, told me she'd left 3 days ago. Said she was visiting family in Oklahoma. He didn't know when she'd return. I asked if anyone else had been by asking questions. He nodded. Park ranger, big guy, Navajo. He seemed angry. I called Tate from my motel room. Voicemail. I tried twice more. Nothing. At midnight, my phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Stop looking. Some doors close behind you." I recognized the phrasing. Vasquez. I replied, "Where are you?" 3 dots pulsed, then vanished. No response. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I drove back to the park, stopping at the maintenance shed near Blue Mesa. Inside, I found old patrol logs stored in cardboard boxes, records from before digital filing. I dug through until I found Vasquez's handwritten reports from 2003, the year Thomas Bennett vanished. Her notes were meticulous. Weather conditions, visitor counts, wildlife sightings, but tucked between pages, loose sheets in different handwriting. A letter addressed to future rangers who see. I read it standing under a single bare bulb, breath fogging in the unheated shed. If you're reading this, someone else has crossed. I don't know how many it will take before the pattern becomes undeniable. I don't know if anyone will believe you. I stopped believing in simple explanations after my 3rd year here. The petrified wood isn't inert. It's a record, yes, but it's also a bridge. The Triassic period, when these trees lived, existed in a time before humans, before mammals, before most of what we consider life as we know it. But life existed, thrived. And when those forests died, buried under volcanic ash and sediment, their structure was preserved in stone. Perfect replicas down to the cellular level. What if memory works the same way? What if consciousness under the right conditions can be preserved in mineral? The people who disappear aren't dying. They're being absorbed. Their awareness transfers into the lattice structure of the stone. They become part of the record. And from that vantage point, they can perceive time differently. Past, present, future. All accessible because stone doesn't experience linear duration. It simply exists. The cameras capture the moment of transfer. The dust is particulate matter responding to an electromagnetic shift. The shapes are the people mid-transition, caught between carbon-based life and silicon-based existence. I've tried to explain this to my supervisors. They think I'm suffering from isolation-induced psychosis. Maybe I am, but I've seen too many cameras with the same final image. I've felt the air pressure change on that ridge. I've heard voices in the wind that speak languages no human tongue has shaped. And I've made a choice. When my time comes, I want to cross. I want to know what they know. I want to see what they see. If you're reading this and you feel the pull, trust it. But if you're afraid, stay away from the ridge at dusk. Don't linger. Don't listen. The wood is patient. It can wait another 1,000,000 years. The letter was signed Elena Vasquez, 2005. 8 years before I arrived. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my jacket. Outside, the sun climbed pale and cold. I drove to the ridge trail and hiked up, lungs burning in the dry air. At the top, I found fresh offerings. 3 carved pieces of petrified wood, arranged in a triangle. In the center, a camera, not Claire's, not David's, newer model. I checked the screen. 1 video file, time-stamped yesterday. I hit play. The footage showed the ridge at dusk. The camera was on a tripod aimed at the teepees. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then the dust began to swirl. The vortex formed, larger than I'd seen before, spinning with a low hum that the camera mic barely captured. A figure stepped into frame from the left. Marcus Tate. He wore civilian clothes, no uniform. He carried a carved piece of wood in both hands, holding it out like an offering. He walked toward the vortex without hesitation. The dust opened, creating a corridor of swirling light. He stepped inside. The camera shook, focus blurring, then stabilized. The vortex collapsed. The ridge was empty. The video ended. I played it again. And again. On the 4th viewing, I noticed something in the background. Just before Tate entered the vortex, 3 shapes stood among the teepees. Humanoid. Watching. One raised a hand in what might have been a wave or a warning. The shapes flickered, there and gone, but I recognized the stance of the middle figure. Claire. I was sure of it. I sat on the stone slab until the sun began its descent. The carved pieces still formed their triangle. I didn't touch them. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called the district office. The receptionist answered. I asked for Chief Tate. She paused. "Chief Tate is on medical leave, sir. Can someone else help you?" I asked when he'd left. 3 days ago. He called in, said he needed time for a family emergency. Is everything all right? I ended the call. 3 days. The same day Elena Vasquez left for Oklahoma. The same day the neighbor said Tate had come by asking questions. The wind picked up, carrying that copper bone smell. I checked my watch. 20 minutes until sunset. I could leave, hike down, drive away, pretend I'd seen nothing. File a report full of bureaucratic language that explained away the unexplainable. Or I could stay. I thought about Claire's last journal entry. Either way, I think I'm ready to stop running. I thought about Tate, built like a fire hydrant, carrying the weight of too many secrets, choosing to step into dust and light rather than keep pretending. I thought about Elena Vasquez carving keys and handing them to strangers at trailheads. The sun touched the horizon, painting the Badlands in shades of fire. I pulled the carved wood from my pocket, the piece Vasquez had given me years ago. It felt warm. Not stone warm, body warm. I placed it in the center of the triangle, completing a pattern I didn't understand, but felt in my bones was right. Then I sat, waited, watched the light bleed from the sky. My Cherokee grandmother used to say that some places are thin. The boundary between this world and the next wears down like old cloth, and if you press gently, you can feel what's on the other side. The petrified forest was thin. I'd known it from my first day. I'd just been too afraid to press. The dust began to swirl as the sun slipped below the mesas. No wind, just particles responding to something deeper than weather. The vortex formed slowly, gracefully, spinning counterclockwise with that low hum that felt like a heartbeat. I stood. My legs didn't shake this time. The air pressure dropped. My ears popped. The smell of copper flooded my nose, and underneath it, something else. Green. Growing. Alive. The forest, as it had been before, stone claimed it. I took one step forward, then another. The carved pieces glowed faint orange, illuminated from within. The vortex opened wider, creating that corridor of light and dust. I saw them then. Not shapes. People. Claire in her hiking boots, camera around her neck. David Marsh with his notebook. Thomas Bennett from 2003. Others I didn't recognize, dozens of them, standing among trees that shimmered between wood and stone. They weren't ghosts. They were solid, real, alive in a way that defied the biology I'd been taught. Marcus Tate stood at the front, and when he saw me, he smiled. Not the tired smile of a bureaucrat carrying secrets. The smile of someone who'd finally set down a burden too heavy to bear. Behind them, the forest stretched endlessly. Trees hundreds of feet tall, their bark rainbow-hued, their canopy filtering light that came from a sun I'd never seen. Rivers ran through channels that would become dry washes in another age. Creatures moved in the underbrush, low and quick, built on body plans that evolution had long since abandoned. And threading through it all, a presence. Vast, patient, ancient. The consciousness of the forest itself, preserved in stone, dreaming across millennia, welcoming those who chose to step outside of linear time and into something older. Claire raised her camera and took my picture. The flash froze me mid-step. I felt something shift inside my chest, a sensation like ice melting or seeds sprouting. My perception doubled, then tripled. I was Henry Callan, standing on a ridge in the Painted Desert in 2009. I was also a seed falling from a tree crown in the Triassic. I was sap running beneath bark. I was wood becoming stone atom by atom. I was the stone remembering being wood. All of it true. All of it happening simultaneously because stone doesn't understand then and now. It only understands is. I took another step. The corridor widened. The hum deepened, resonating in my ribs. I could turn back. The vortex would release me. I'd hike down, file my report, live out my years carrying this knowledge like a stone in my pocket. Or I could keep walking, join the others, trade linear time for something vast and strange, stop running from the noise in my head and step into a silence so deep it contained every sound that ever was or would be. My grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. Some boundaries aren't walls. They're doors, and doors go both ways. I stepped into the light. Time doesn't work the way I thought it did. That's the first thing you learn when you cross. The second thing is that you don't lose yourself. You expand. I am still Henry Callan, Cherokee Ranger, veteran, man who carried too much noise in his head. But I'm also part of something larger, woven into the lattice structure of stone that remembers being alive when the world was young and strange. I can perceive my own timeline from outside it. Birth, childhood, war, the desert, this moment, death, decades ahead. All of it visible like beads on a string, and I can touch any bead I choose. The forest around me breathes, not metaphorically. I feel the exchange of gases, the draw of water through vascular tissue, the slow manufacture of cellulose and lignin. These trees will stand for another 1,000 years before volcanic ash buries them. Their cells will be replaced molecule by molecule with silica, creating perfect mineral copies that will endure for 200 million years. And within that stone lattice, memory persists. The forest's awareness of itself, preserved like an insect in amber, dreaming across epochs. Claire approaches through undergrowth thick with ferns taller than houses. She moves with the confidence of someone who's been here longer, who's learned to navigate perception that exists in 4 dimensions instead of 3. She doesn't speak. Communication here happens differently. Intention flows between us like water finding its level. She shares her experience. The relief of shedding linear time, the joy of seeing her daughter's birth and her own death and everything between, all equally present, all equally precious. The understanding that nothing is truly lost because stone remembers everything. I share my confusion, my questions. She responds with patience, her thoughts arriving in my mind fully formed. You're not dead, Henry. You're translated, carbon to silicon, organic to mineral. It's not metaphor. Your consciousness has transferred into the crystalline structure of the petrified wood. Your body is still on the ridge. You can return to it if you choose, but most don't. Linear time feels like a cage once you've experienced this. I look down at my hands. They're solid, real, but when I focus, I can see through them to the mineral structure beneath. Quartz, opal, jasper. The same elements that compose the petrified logs, arranged in patterns that mirror human anatomy. Marcus Tate stands beside a stream that will disappear in another age. He's younger here, the weight of bureaucracy lifted from his shoulders. His thoughts touch mine. I spent 20 years managing that park. 20 years watching people vanish and pretending it was normal. When I finally understood what Vasquez had been trying to tell us, that the wood offers a choice, not a threat, I knew I couldn't keep lying. So I chose. My wife died 3 years ago. My kids are grown. I had nothing holding me to linear time except fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of letting go. But the desert taught me that letting go isn't death. It's transformation. Others gather. The ones who crossed before. A prospector from 1891 who'd been searching for gold and found something infinitely more valuable. A Navajo shepherd from 1934 who'd heard the old stories and recognized the truth in them. A geology student from 1978 who'd been studying fossilization and realized the process could apply to consciousness. Each of them whole, each of them woven into the stone's memory, existing simultaneously in the Triassic and in the moment of their crossing and in every point between. I ask the question that burns in me. Can we go back to our original timeline? Claire's response comes layered with complexity. Yes and no, your body is there. You can re-inhabit it. But you'll carry this awareness with you. You'll perceive time as stone perceives it. Non-linear, all at once. Most people's minds can't hold that duality. They break, go mad. The ones who return successfully are rare. They live between worlds, translating experience across the boundary. Shamans, mystics, prophets. People called crazy by those who only see one beat at a time. I think about Elena Vasquez, her carvings, her warnings, her careful documentation. She'd been translating all along, moving between the forest that was and the desert that is, carrying messages across the boundary, leaving keys for those ready to turn them. I understand now why she vanished when I got too close. She'd been preparing for her final crossing, tying up loose ends, saying goodbye to linear time. I wonder if she's here now, in this forest, or if she chose a different moment, a different iteration of the boundary. The ancient presence I felt before makes itself known more directly. It's not a single consciousness. It's the collective awareness of every organism that ever lived in this forest. Trees, ferns, early reptiles, amphibians, insects, bacteria, all preserved in the stone's memory, all dreaming together across the vast gulf of time. They don't communicate in words, they share sensation. The feeling of sunlight on leaves, the taste of mineral-rich water, the slow stretch of roots into earth, the patient accumulation of seasons. They welcome us because we're the first creatures in 200 million years who've learned to join their dream. I make my choice. Not to stay, not yet, but not to fully return either. I'll be a translator like Vasquez. I'll walk between worlds. I'll carry the stone's memory in my body and try to help others understand that the boundaries we perceive are permeable. That time is not a river, but an ocean. That consciousness doesn't end when carbon-based life ceases. It transforms, translates, transcends. I feel the agreement ripple through the collective. They'll allow it. They'll maintain the connection. But there's a price. There always is. The price is isolation. No one in linear time will truly understand what I've seen. I'll try to explain, and they'll nod politely and whisper about trauma or heat stroke or mental illness. I'll file reports that will be archived and forgotten. I'll watch people I care about grow old while I age differently, my cells slowly mineralizing, becoming more stone than flesh. Eventually, I'll return here permanently. Not death. Translation. But until then, I'll stand guard at the boundary. I'll watch for those ready to cross. I'll leave keys for those who need them. I'll document the pattern so that someday, when humanity evolves enough to understand, the evidence will be waiting. Claire embraces me. Her form feels solid and vaporous at once. Thank you for coming, Henry. Thank you for seeing. The hardest part of crossing is knowing everyone you left behind thinks you're dead. But you'll tell them differently. You'll tell them we're alive, just in a way they're not ready to comprehend yet. I promise I will. Even though I know most won't believe me. Even though I'll be labeled delusional or worse. The truth demands witness, regardless of whether the testimony is accepted. The vortex opens again. I see the ridge, frozen in the moment I stepped away. My body stands at the corridor's edge, 1 foot in the Triassic, 1 foot in the Anthropocene. I step back into it. The sensation is like diving into cold water. A shock, a compression. My awareness, which had expanded to encompass millions of years, contracts back into the prison of linear time. Seconds tick forward one by one. My lungs burn. My heart pounds. The carved pieces at my feet have dimmed. The dust settles. The ridge is silent. I turn. The teepees stand empty under starlight. No forest, no figures. Just ancient stone carved by wind and water into shapes that echo what once lived here. But I can still feel them. The connection remains, thin as spider silk, but unbroken. I'll carry it for the rest of my life. However long that is. However long I remain more flesh than stone. I gather the carved pieces and descend in darkness, my path illuminated by stars older than the forest I just left. At my truck, I find a note under the windshield wiper. Elena Vasquez's handwriting. Welcome back, translator. The real work begins now. Check your mailbox in Sanders. I've left you tools you'll need. Don't waste time trying to convince the ones who refuse to see. Focus on the ones who already suspect. The ones who felt the pull. The ones who'll listen. And Henry, thank you for choosing the hard path. The world needs people who can stand between worlds. I drove to Sanders at dawn. The mailbox at Vasquez's trailer contained a package addressed to me. Inside, a dozen carved pieces of petrified wood, each one unique, each one warm to the touch. Also, a leather journal filled with her handwriting. Instructions, techniques, how to identify people ready to cross, how to approach them, how to plant the seed without forcing the decision, how to live between worlds without going mad. The journal's final page held a single sentence. The boundary is everywhere. You just have to know how to look. I spent the next 3 years working as an independent wilderness guide, leading small groups into remote areas of the Southwest. Not all of them, just the ones who responded to specific phrases in my advertisements. Experience time differently. Walk where ancient forests dreamed. Discover the boundary between then and now. Most ignored the ads, but a few responded. The ones who felt the pull. The ones who'd been searching without knowing what they sought. I'd take them to thin places, give them carved wood, teach them to sit quietly and listen to the stone. Some crossed, some returned. Some stood at the edge and chose to stay in linear time, but they carried the knowledge with them. They became more patient, more present, less afraid of death because they'd glimpsed what lies beyond the transformation. They went back to their lives as accountants and teachers and mechanics, but they moved differently through the world. They saw the boundaries. They respected the ancient places. They passed the knowledge to others quietly, carefully, planting seeds in soil that might take decades to sprout. I documented everything, not in official reports. Those had been useless. Instead, I started a blog, posted videos, uploaded photographs. Most people dismissed it as New Age nonsense or creative fiction. But scattered among the skeptics were comments from people who understood. I've felt this in Bryce Canyon. Something similar happened to me in Zion. My grandmother told stories about places where time works differently. The network grew. small, scattered, but real. In 2012, I returned to Petrified Forest as a civilian. The Park Service had erected new signs at the Blue Mesa trailhead. Stay on designated trails. Do not approach cliff edges. Report any unusual dust patterns to rangers immediately. They'd codified the mystery without solving it. Bureaucracy's answer to the inexplicable. I hiked the Ridge Trail legally this time, during permitted hours. At the top, I found fresh offerings, carved pieces arranged in patterns. People were finding their way here without my help. The boundary called to those ready to hear it. I sat on the stone slab where I'd found Claire's camera 7 years earlier. The sun descended toward the mesas. I didn't need the vortex to form. I could feel the forest on the other side, patient and present, dreaming its long dream. Claire was there, and Tate, and Vasquez, and hundreds of others stretching back centuries. Not dead, not lost, transformed, existing in a state that human language has no words for because linear time is the only framework most minds can process. A young woman approached up the trail, camera around her neck, carrying a carved piece of wood. She looked uncertain, afraid, hopeful. I recognized the expression. I'd worn it myself once. I stood, introduced myself, asked if she needed directions. She showed me the carving, asked if I knew what it meant. I could have lied, could have played dumb, could have sent her back to the visitor center with a warning about staying on trails. Instead, I told her the truth, or part of it, as much as she was ready to hear. The wood remembers being alive, I said. Some people who sit with it long enough remember too. They remember what it's like to exist outside linear time, to perceive all moments as equally present, to be woven into something larger than a single human life. The carving in your hand is a key. If you choose to use it, come back here at sunset. Sit quietly. Listen. The wood will decide if you're ready. If you are, you'll understand what I mean. If you're not, you'll just have a nice meditation experience and some pretty photos. Either way, the choice is yours. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Will I come back if I cross? I thought about my answer carefully. You can, but most don't. Not permanently. Linear time feels limiting once you've experienced the alternative. But some of us move between worlds, translators. We carry messages across the boundary. We help others understand that death isn't an ending, just a transformation from carbon to silicon, from sequence to simultaneity, from alone to woven into everything that ever was. She thanked me and descended toward the parking lot. I watched her go, wondering if I'd see her again, wondering if she'd choose to cross or choose to stay, wondering if it mattered. The boundary existed regardless of whether individual humans chose to traverse it. The stone would keep dreaming, the forest would keep calling, and those ready to answer would find their way here, drawn by something deeper than logic or language. I've lived between worlds for 15 years now. My hair has gone white, though I'm barely 50. My skin has taken on a faint mineral sheen in certain light. My bones ache with the slow process of transformation. I'm becoming stone, not quickly. The process takes decades in linear time, though from the forest's perspective it happens instantly. I don't fear it. I've seen what waits on the other side. The vast awareness, the freedom from sequence, the joy of being woven into a consciousness that spans millions of years. But I'm not ready to fully cross yet. There's work still to do, more people to guide, more seeds to plant, more evidence to document for the future when humanity might finally understand that consciousness doesn't require carbon. That awareness can transfer into mineral. That the boundaries between life and death, between then and now, between self and other, are far more permeable than we've been taught. The stone knows this, has always known it. It's patient. It can wait for us to catch up. Sometimes, on still desert nights, I stand on that ridge and watch the vortex form. I see the others moving through the forest that was, living their expanded existence, free from the tyranny of clocks and calendars. They wave. I wave back. We're connected across the boundary, thin as spider silk, strong as stone. One day I'll join them permanently. But not today. Today I have people to meet, keys to distribute, stories to tell. The work of translation continues. If you're reading this, if you've felt the pull, if you've stood in ancient places and sensed something vast and patient watching from the stone, you're not crazy. You're perceiving reality more accurately than most. The petrified forest isn't dead. It's dreaming. And it's calling to those ready to join that dream. Whether you answer is your choice. No judgment either way. Some are meant to stay in linear time. Others are meant to cross. And a few, like me, are meant to walk between worlds, carrying messages, planting seeds, standing guard at the boundary until the work is done. The desert keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its promises. And the greatest promise is this: nothing is truly lost. Everything that ever lived is preserved somewhere in the stone's memory. Every tree, every creature, every human who ever drew breath. We're all part of the record, all woven into the lattice, all dreaming together across the vast gulf of time. The only question is whether we wake up to that truth while we still have the choice to cross consciously, or whether we wait for death to translate us without understanding what's happening. I made my choice. Claire made hers. Tate made his. Vasquez made hers. Hundreds of others across the centuries have made theirs. Now the choice is yours. The carved wood is waiting. The ridge calls at sunset. The boundary thins, and on the other side, the forest dreams, patient and eternal, welcoming those brave enough to step out of sequence and into simultaneity. Will you answer, or will you walk away? Either way, the stone will remember. It always does. That's what stone does best. Remember, dream, wait, and welcome home those ready to become something more than flesh and bone in the tyranny of ticking clocks. The petrified road goes both ways. Most only see the direction that leads forward, moment by moment, year by year, toward inevitable decay. But stone sees the other direction too, the one that spirals inward and outward simultaneously. The one that leads to the forest that was, and the forest that is, and the forest that will be, all existing in the eternal now of mineral consciousness. I've walked both directions. I stand at the crossroads, and I tell you this: the choice is real, the boundary is real, the transformation is real. Everything else is just noise we tell ourselves to avoid facing the terrifying, liberating truth that we are so much more than we think we are. The sun sets over the painted desert one more time. The dust begins to swirl. And somewhere in the stone, the forest dreams on, patient and vast, waiting for the next soul brave enough or broken enough or curious enough to step into the light and become part of something eternal. I'll be here when they arrive, standing between worlds, translating experience across the boundary, carrying the stone's message to those ready to hear it. Until the day my own transformation completes and I join the others permanently in the dream that never ends. Until then, I walk the petrified road, 1 foot in the Triassic, 1 foot in the now, a living bridge between what was and what is and what might someday be. When humanity finally understands that time is not a river, but an ocean, and we've always been drowning in its depths, too afraid to open our eyes and see how beautiful the water truly is. My name is Brooke Vasquez, and this happened to me in 2011 in Petrified Forest National Park, Arizona. I'm Cherokee through my father's line, raised on stories about respecting what the earth gives and taking only what you need. I became a ranger because I thought protecting fossilized forests would be simpler than protecting living ones. Petrified wood can't burn, can't be logged. It just sits in the desert sun, ancient and patient, waiting for tourists to photograph it and move on. I was wrong about the simple part. The dead don't stay buried as neatly as you'd think, especially when people start digging where they shouldn't. That October, Dr. Rita Salazar brought her paleontology team from Northern Arizona University to survey a newly exposed fossil bed in the park's southern wilderness. Flash floods the previous spring had carved through badlands near the teepees, revealing a layer of Triassic sediment rich with phytosaur remains. The university had secured permits for a 3-week excavation. Standard procedure: grid the site, document everything, extract specimens with dental tools and patience. I was assigned as their ranger liaison, checking permits, ensuring they stayed within authorized boundaries, making sure no one pocketed a 200-million-year-old vertebra as a souvenir. The team consisted of 5 people. Dr. Salazar, a woman in her 50s who'd spent 30 years studying extinct reptiles and spoke about phytosaurs like they were her children. 2 grad students, twins named Kira and Levi Hatch, who worked with synchronized efficiency that made me dizzy to watch. A photographer named Jerome Hill, who documented every stage of the excavation with expensive cameras and quiet intensity, and Nolan Keene, a freelance paleontologist with a resume that read like an adventure novel. Argentina, Mongolia, Madagascar. He'd dug fossils from every continent except Antarctica, and the way he talked, that was next on his list. I met them on their first morning, hiking to the site with water and a briefing about heat safety. The desert had cooled from summer's brutal temperatures, but October's sun still burned exposed skin. Dr. Salazar spread her survey map across a folding table, weighted corners with rocks, and walked me through their work plan. Standard grid excavation, photo documentation, plaster jackets for transport, everything by the book. I approved and left them to it, hiking back to my patrol route. The first week passed without incident. I checked on them daily. They made steady progress, uncovering a partial phytosaur skull and several articulated limbs. Jerome's photos showed the bones emerging from red clay like ghosts materializing. On day 8, Nolan Keene didn't show up for the morning briefing. Dr. Salazar radioed me at dawn, voice tight with controlled panic. He'd been in his tent at midnight when she did her last head count. By 6 a.m., the tent was empty, sleeping bag cold. His excavation tools were gone. His backpack, his Jeep and his water bottles. Either he'd left voluntarily or someone had removed every trace of him with surgical precision. I hiked to the site immediately, noting details. No drag marks in the sand, no signs of struggle. The tent fabric showed no cuts or tears. The zipper was closed from the inside, which meant he'd exited normally, but where he'd gone, and why remained blank as the cloudless sky. I radioed dispatch for a search and rescue team while examining Nolan's tent more carefully. His personal gear was minimal. A few changes of clothes, a dog-eared field guide to Triassic fauna, a satellite phone with a dead battery, and tucked under his sleeping pad, a hand-drawn map. Not the official survey map Dr. Salazar had shown me. This one was sketched on the back of a topographic sheet, lines hasty, annotations in cramped handwriting I could barely read. The map showed the park boundaries, the current excavation site marked with a blue X, and several other locations marked with red circles. One red circle sat far outside park boundaries, maybe 15 miles southeast. Someone had drawn an arrow from the excavation site to that distant red circle and written a single word beside it. Real. I photographed the map, then showed it to Dr. Salazar. Her face went pale. She snatched the paper, studied it, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her field notebook. That's nothing. Nolan likes to explore. Probably just landmarks he found interesting. Her tone said otherwise. I pressed her. She deflected, said Nolan was eccentric, obsessive, prone to wandering, but her hand shook as she poured coffee, and she avoided eye contact. The grad students exchanged glances I couldn't interpret. Jerome focused on his cameras, suddenly very interested in lens caps. Something was wrong beyond a missing team member. Something they all knew, and I didn't. Search and rescue arrived by noon. 4 rangers from Holbrook with dogs, drones, and thermal imaging equipment. We combed a 5-mile radius around the excavation site, finding nothing but coyote tracks and the bleached skeleton of a pronghorn. The dogs picked up Nolan's scent leading southeast toward the red circle on his map, then lost it where the ground turned to exposed bedrock. Thermal imaging showed no heat signatures in the surrounding badlands. The drones captured empty desert stretching to the horizon. By sunset, the incident commander, a grizzled veteran named Ray Ortega, pulled me aside. Either your archaeologist walked out of the park on his own, or something removed him so cleanly we're looking in the wrong place. You see any reason he'd bolt? I mentioned the map. Ray examined my photo, zooming in on the annotations. His expression hardened. That red circle's on Navajo Nation land, outside our jurisdiction. But I've seen that area. Nothing there but deep washes and dead ends. Nobody goes out that way because there's no reason to. No trails, no water, no roads. If your guy headed there on foot, he's in trouble. Heat during the day, cold at night, and terrain that'll break an ankle if you're not careful. He forwarded the photo to Navajo Nation Rangers and gave me a card with his direct number. Call me if you find anything else. Maps with mystery destinations make me nervous. I spent that evening searching records for any mention of the Red Circle's location. Park archives held century-old survey notes, prospector logs, and incident reports dating back to the park's establishment in 1906. I found 3 references to the area southeast of the teepees. In 1923, a fossil hunter named Eugene Cross filed a claim for what he called the richest Triassic deposit in North America. Park Service denied the claim because it fell outside federal land. Cross went out anyway and never returned. His mule came back alone 3 weeks later, saddlebags empty. In 1957, 2 geology students hiked to the same general area searching for Cross's supposed mother lode. Only one returned, dehydrated and confused, claiming his partner had fallen into a hidden sinkhole. Searchers found no sinkhole, no body. The student later recanted, saying heat exhaustion had caused hallucinations. The third reference was a memo dated 1989 from a ranger named Kathleen Morris. She'd received a tip about illegal fossil poaching in the same area. When she investigated, she found fresh excavation pits and abandoned equipment, but no poachers. Her memo noted unusual geological formations inconsistent with surrounding terrain and recommended further study. The recommendation was denied. Budget cuts. The memo was filed and forgotten. I photocopied all 3 documents and added them to my incident file. A pattern emerged. People went to that red circle looking for something. Most didn't come back. Those who did either lied or went silent. Day 9 brought the media. Local news crews arrived asking about the missing scientist and turning a search operation into a spectacle. Dr. Salazar gave a statement, describing Nolan as experienced and capable, likely sheltering somewhere until conditions improved. She didn't mention the map. When reporters asked me for comment, I stuck to the script. Active search. Multiple agencies involved. No evidence of foul play. Inside, my instincts screamed that everyone was lying, including me. That night, I returned to the excavation site alone, hiking under starlight. The camp sat abandoned, the university team having relocated to park housing after the media circus. I entered Nolan's tent with my flashlight and searched more carefully. Beneath the sleeping pad, I found something I'd missed during the initial search. A second map, this one torn from a USGS topographic sheet. The paper was old, creased, water-stained. The red circle was marked here too, but with additional detail. Someone had sketched a cross-section view showing layers of sediment and a notation. Chamber, 40 feet down, sealed since Triassic. Below that, a list of GPS coordinates and a warning in different handwriting. Older, faded, do not excavate beyond marker stones, subsurface instability. The handwriting matched samples in the archive from Eugene Cross, the fossil hunter who'd disappeared in 1923. Nolan had found Cross's original notes, and he'd gone to verify them. I photographed everything, then noticed something else. The corner of the map, the section showing the red circle, had been torn away. Recently. The tear edge was clean, fresh. Someone had removed the exact location coordinates. I searched the tent again, checking pockets, seams, even the tent's interior lining. Nothing. Either Nolan had taken that piece with him or someone else had removed it to prevent others from following. I bagged the partial map as evidence and hiked back to my truck. On the hood, written in dust, a single word: stop. The letters were finger-drawn, large, deliberate. The dust was still damp from the writer's touch. Someone had been watching me. Someone who didn't want me searching further. I radioed Ray Ortega. He arrived within an hour, examined the message, and made a decision. We're escalating this. Either Nolan Keene is in immediate danger, or we're looking at something criminal. I'm bringing in FBI for possible kidnapping. While he made calls, I photographed the dust message from multiple angles. The letters were evenly spaced, written by someone calm and methodical. Not a panicked warning, a deliberate threat. Ray's voice drifted from his truck. Phrases like jurisdiction complications and Navajo cooperation told me this was becoming political as well as dangerous. I wasn't sure which was worse. Dr. Salazar called my cell at midnight. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying or screaming or both. Ranger Vasquez, I need to tell you something. Off the record, Nolan found something. 3 days before he disappeared, he showed me a fossil fragment unlike anything I've seen. Not phytosaur, not archosaur, something else. Something that shouldn't exist in Triassic deposits. He said it proved Cross was right, that there was a sealed chamber full of specimens waiting to be discovered. He wanted to go look. I told him no, told him we didn't have permits for off-site work. He got angry, said I was letting politics destroy science. The next morning, he was gone. I asked what kind of fossil. She hesitated long enough that I thought the connection had dropped. Then, quietly, feathers. Barbed, asymmetric feathers. But birds didn't evolve until the Jurassic 60 million years later. If Nolan's fragment is authentic, it rewrites evolutionary history. That kind of discovery makes careers, or destroys them if it's fake. He was obsessed, Ranger, obsessed enough to risk everything. I should have stopped him. I should have confiscated his gear. I should have called you, but I didn't, and now he's out there, and it's my fault. She hung up before I could respond. I sat in my truck listening to coyotes yip in the darkness and wondered how many lies this desert had swallowed over the decades. Wondered if Nolan Keene would become another name in the archive, another person who went looking for something ancient and found something else instead. Day 10, FBI arrived. 2 agents in dark suits that looked absurd against the desert backdrop. They interviewed everyone, read every document, studied every photo. They were polite and thorough and told me nothing. But I overheard one conversation with Ray Ortega. Agent Marsh, a woman with gray temples and sharp eyes, said Nolan Keene had a history. Arrested twice for illegal fossil trafficking. Never charged. Suspected of using academic positions as cover for black market sales. The university hadn't disclosed this during permit applications. If they had, he wouldn't have been allowed in the park. Dr. Salazar was facing sanctions. The excavation permit was under review, and Nolan's disappearance had shifted from rescue operation to criminal investigation. That changed everything. If Nolan was a trafficker, the map took on new meaning. Not a scientific quest, but a treasure hunt. The red circle wasn't a research site, but a target. The chamber notation described a cache worth stealing. And the warning about subsurface instability? Maybe real. Maybe misdirection. Either way, Nolan had gone out there knowing what he was after. The question was whether he'd found it, or whether the desert had found him first. I requested permission from Agent Marsh to investigate the red circle location. She denied it. Too dangerous. Wrong jurisdiction. Insufficient support. I nodded like I agreed and started planning how to go anyway. That night, I studied the torn map again and noticed something I'd missed. Along the edge of the Tayar, faint pencil marks. Numbers. Partial GPS coordinates. Whoever tore away the corner hadn't realized the coordinates bled through from the reverse side. With careful lighting and magnification, I reconstructed them. The location was 17 miles southeast, deep in a canyon network locals called the Devil's Spine. Named for the sharp ridges that looked like vertebrae from above. Named for the people who'd gone in and never come out. Ray Ortega's warning echoed. Terrain that'll break an ankle if you're not careful. But Nolan had gone anyway. And if there was any chance he was alive, waiting for rescue in some collapsed chamber, I couldn't sit in an office pushing papers. I loaded my truck with climbing gear, medical supplies, and enough water for 3 days. I left a sealed envelope with Ray Ortega's contact info at the ranger station, addressed to my supervisor with instructions to open it if I wasn't back in 48 hours. The envelope contained copies of all the maps, my reconstructed GPS coordinates, and a brief explanation. Not a suicide note. An insurance policy. Then I drove south at 3 a.m., headlights cutting through darkness, following forgotten roads that turned to tracks that turned to memory and hope. The desert stretched endless under stars so bright they hurt to watch. Somewhere out there, Nolan Keene was either dead or wishing he was. And I was driving toward the same fate, powered by stubbornness and the Cherokee belief that the land speaks if you're willing to listen. I just hoped I'd understand what it said before it was too late. The Devil's Spine revealed itself at dawn, a jagged ridge of exposed sandstone erupting from flat desert like a broken promise. The formations looked almost deliberate, as if some ancient force had carved them for a purpose we'd forgotten. I parked at the end of the navigable track and continued on foot, GPS unit guiding me toward the coordinates I'd reconstructed. The terrain was brutal, loose shale that shifted underfoot. Washes carved so deep you couldn't see bottom. Exposure that left no shade, no mercy, no room for mistakes. I understood why the area stayed unexplored. It fought visitors with geological malice. 2 hours in, I found the marker stones. 3 flat slabs arranged in a triangle, each carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Not Navajo. Not Hopi. Older, maybe, or invented by Cross to mark his claim. Inside the triangle, the ground showed disturbance. Old excavation, partially filled by wind and time. Someone had dug here, then stopped, or been stopped. I approached carefully, testing each step. The earth felt hollow, wrong, like walking on a drum stretched too tight. My boots echoed faintly. I knelt and brushed away loose sand, revealing a wooden board, weathered but intact. A cover. Beneath it, darkness and the smell of stale air and something else. Copper. Blood. Fear. I lifted the wooden board slowly, splinters catching on my gloves. The opening beneath was roughly circular, maybe 4 feet across, lined with stones that showed deliberate placement. Not a natural sinkhole. A shaft. Man-made, or at least man-modified. I clicked on my headlamp and peered down. The beam revealed a vertical drop of about 12 feet into what looked like a carved chamber. Rope fragments hung from an anchor point, old and frayed. Someone had descended recently enough that the rope hadn't fully deteriorated. Nolan, probably. I called his name. My voice echoed strangely, bouncing back, distorted. No answer. I tested the anchor point, an iron spike driven deep into solid rock. It held my weight. I rigged my climbing rope, double-checked the knots, and rappelled down. The descent took seconds, but my heart hammered like I was falling into something far deeper than 12 feet. I touched bottom and unclipped, sweeping my headlamp across the space. The chamber was larger than I'd expected, roughly circular, maybe 20 feet in diameter. The walls were natural sandstone, carved smooth by ancient water, but the floor had been excavated deliberately. Grid lines scratched into stone, small pits where tools had scraped, and in the center, a tarp covering something bulky. I approached the tarp carefully, watching for tripwires or collapse warnings. The desert had taught me that old excavations were tombs waiting to close. I lifted one corner of the tarp. Underneath, wooden crates. 4 of them, each about 2 feet square, lids sealed with wire. The wood was old but well-maintained, stamped with faded letters, E. Cross, Private Collection, 1923. Eugene Cross's cache. Nolan had found it. I pried open the nearest crate with my multi-tool. Inside, nestled in straw, fossils. Dozens of them. Bone fragments wrapped in cloth, each labeled in spidery handwriting. Phytosaur femur. Metoposaur skull plate. Archosaur vertebra. Beautiful specimens, worth thousands to collectors. Worth careers to scientists. Worth a man's life, apparently. But the fossils weren't what made my breath catch. In the bottom of the crate, wrapped separately in oilcloth, a notebook. Eugene Cross's field journal. I opened it carefully, pages brittle with age. The entries started enthusiastic, cataloging his finds, sketching diagrams, describing this chamber as the richest fossil deposit I've encountered. Then the tone shifted. Entries became shorter, more cryptic. Something wrong with the bones. Articulation suggests movement post-mortem. Found fresh scratches on chamber wall. I am alone here. I must be alone here. The bones remember. I can hear them remembering. The final entry, dated 3 days before, Cross disappeared. I have sealed the lower passage. No one should go deeper. What's below is not paleontology. It's warning. Lower passage. I swept my headlamp across the chamber again, searching. The beam caught an irregularity in the far wall, partially hidden by a stack of empty crates. I moved them aside, revealing an opening. Low, narrow, angling downward. Someone had tried to seal it with stacked rocks, but the barrier had been recently dismantled. The stones lay scattered. Fresh scrape marks on the floor showed where something heavy had been dragged through. Nolan's backpack, maybe, or Nolan himself. I called his name again. This time, I thought I heard something. Not a voice. A scraping sound. Rhythmic. deliberate. Coming from deep in the passage, I should have climbed out, radioed for backup, waited for proper equipment and support. That's what training dictated. That's what common sense screamed. But the scraping sound had a pattern, SOS, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Someone was alive down there signaling. I couldn't leave them. I wedged myself into the passage, pulling my pack behind me. The walls pressed close, sandstone rough against my shoulders. My headlamp beam showed the tunnel descending at a 45-degree angle for maybe 30 feet before leveling out. The scraping sound continued, slightly louder now. I crawled forward, ignoring the voice in my head that sounded like Ray Ortega, asking what the hell I thought I was doing. The passage opened into a second chamber, smaller than the first, the ceiling so low I had to crouch. My headlamp revealed why Cross had tried to seal this place. The walls were covered in fossils, not scattered fragments but complete skeletons, dozens of them embedded in the stone. They looked like phytosaurs, those crocodile-like reptiles from the Triassic, but wrong. The proportions were off. The skulls too large, the limbs positioned strangely as if the creatures had been trying to climb vertical walls when they died, and their mouths were open. All of them. Jaws stretched wide in what looked like screams frozen in stone. In the center of the chamber, Nolan Keene. He sat with his back against the wall, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. His face was gray with pain and dehydration, lips cracked, eyes sunken. When my headlamp hit him, he flinched like I'd struck him. "Took you long enough," he croaked. "Thought I'd die down here with them." I moved to his side, assessing injuries. Compound fracture of the left tibia, bone visible through torn flesh. Dehydration, exposure, probably infection starting. He'd been down here at least a day, maybe 2. I gave him water, watching him drink in small sips. "What happened?" He laughed, a dry sound like stone grinding stone. "What happened?" "I found proof, Ranger. Proof that everything we think we know about the Triassic is wrong. Look at them, really look." He gestured at the fossil-covered walls. I did, focusing my light on the nearest skeleton. The longer I looked, the more wrong it became. The skull structure suggested air breathing, but the limb bones showed aquatic adaptations. The rib cage was too deep for a reptile. And the forelimbs... I moved closer. The forelimbs had something that looked almost like proto-feathers. Not true feathers, but the precursor structures that wouldn't evolve for another 60 million years. Nolan was right. If these specimens were authentic, they rewrote evolutionary history. "How did you break your leg?" I asked, already unpacking my medical kit. He grimaced. "The floor. It's not solid. Looks like stone, but it's a thin crust over a void. I stepped wrong, went through. Caught myself, but my leg folded. Been trapped here ever since, listening to them." I paused. "Listening to what? You're alone here." He stared at me, eyes too wide, too bright. "Am I? Then what's that sound?" I held my breath and listened. Beneath the silence, something. A vibration. Rhythmic. Not SOS. Something organic. Breathing, maybe, if something vast and slow were breathing. But that was impossible. Acoustic tricks. The chamber acting as a resonance chamber for wind through the tunnels. Nothing more. I splinted Nolan's leg with aluminum stays from my pack, trying to ignore the sound that didn't exist. He gritted his teeth through the pain, then grabbed my arm. "Don't take the fossils, Ranger. Don't let anyone take them. Cross was right to seal this place. Some things are meant to stay buried." I asked why. He shook his head. "Because they're not fossils, not completely. Something about this chamber, the mineral content, the depth, the way the sediment compressed. The bones mineralized, but the structures stayed active at a molecular level. They remember being alive, and they're angry we disturbed them. That was shock talking. Delirium from pain and dehydration. I told him that as I fitted a rescue harness around his chest. He needed medical attention, fluids, antibiotics. He needed to stop talking nonsense about remembering bones. But as I worked, I felt it too. A pressure in the air. A sense of being watched by something that couldn't possibly watch because it had been dead for 200 million years. I finished securing the harness and prepared to move him. The climb back through the passage would be brutal with an injured man, but I'd done rescues in worse conditions. Probably. As I helped Nolan shift position, his hand knocked against the wall. The impact dislodged a chunk of matrix, and a section of embedded skeleton fell away. Not naturally. The bones moved with purpose, articulating like a living creature testing its range of motion. I watched, frozen, as the small phytosaur skeleton pulled itself free from the surrounding stone and dropped to the floor. It lay still for a moment. Then the skull turned toward us. Empty eye sockets somehow focused. The jaw opened and closed with a dry, clicking sound. The limbs twitched, finding purchase on stone they'd been part of until seconds ago. Nolan's grip on my arm tightened. Run. But there was nowhere to run. The passage behind us was narrow, requiring crawling. The fossil creature was small, maybe 3 feet long, but in that confined space, size didn't matter. It advanced with jerky movements like a puppet manipulated by an amateur. Not alive. Not dead. Something between. Something the desert had preserved and we'd awakened. I grabbed a rock and threw it. The stone passed through the creature without effect. Not solid, just the memory of solidity, the ghost of structure held together by mineralization and something else. Something I didn't have a name for. The creature lunged. I felt cold pass through me. Not physical, but deeper. A sensation like ice forming in my veins. Images flashed. The Triassic world. Heat and humidity. Forests of strange trees. This creature hunting in shallow water. Snapping at prey. Its death, sudden, violent. Ash falling from the sky, burying it alive. The long darkness of fossilization. The rage of being trapped in stone while the world moved on without it. Then the awakening. Modern footsteps echoing in its tomb. Hands disturbing its rest. The fury of something that wanted to stay dead and couldn't. I staggered back, breaking contact. The creature dissolved into dust, but others were stirring. All along the walls, fossils shifted. Bone fragments scraped against stone. Skulls turned. The breathing sound intensified, becoming a chorus of exhalations from throats that were mineral, not flesh. Nolan pulled me toward the passage. Move. They can't hold form long, but there are dozens of them. We need to get out before they figure out how to coordinate. I didn't argue. I grabbed his arm, ignoring his scream of pain, and dragged him toward the opening. We crawled through the passage faster than should have been possible, terror overriding caution. Behind us, the scraping sounds multiplied. Not chasing exactly, just following. Drawn to the living warmth we represented, the carbon-based life they'd lost. We reached the upper chamber, and I practically threw Nolan toward the rope. He grabbed it one-handed, leg dangling, and I pushed from below while he pulled with his good arm. His scream echoed, bones grated, but he moved upward, inch by agonizing inch, until hands reached down from above and hauled him out. I didn't remember calling for help, didn't remember hearing helicopters, but arms pulled me up into daylight so bright it felt like a physical blow. Navajo Nation Rangers surrounded the shaft, weapons drawn, staring at the opening like it might vomit something terrible. Ray Ortega was there, face gray with anger or fear, or both. "You stupid, reckless—" He stopped, seeing my expression. "What's down there, Vasquez?" I couldn't answer, couldn't explain what I'd felt when that thing passed through me. The sense of time collapsing, of being connected to something ancient and furious. I just shook my head and let the paramedics guide me to an ambulance. Nolan was loaded on a stretcher, IV already running, oxygen mask covering his face. But his eyes found mine, and I read the message there. Don't tell them. They won't believe you. They'll think you're crazy. And he was right. I watched as FBI agents descended into the shaft with lights and cameras and evidence bags. They'd find Cross's crates. They'd catalog the fossils. They'd write reports about illegal excavation and tragic accidents. They'd seal the site with concrete and fencing and warning signs. But they wouldn't understand what we'd felt. The anger radiating from those bones. The sense that we'd violated something that should have stayed sealed. The hospital in Holbrook kept me overnight for observation. Mild dehydration, contusions, shock, standard aftermath of a desert rescue gone sideways. Nolan was in surgery for his leg, prognosis good. Dr. Salazar sat in my room at midnight, looking like she'd aged a decade in 10 days. Nolan's talking, saying things that don't make sense. Fossils moving, bones remembering. They think it's medication and trauma, but you were there. What really happened, Ranger Vasquez? I could lie, should lie, maintain the fiction that everything was rational and explicable, but I was tired of lies. Something's wrong with that chamber, I said. The mineral content, the depth, something. The fossilization process didn't complete normally. The structures maintained some level of organization. When we disturbed them, they reacted. Not life, not death. Something else. Dr. Salazar studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I've heard rumors. Formations like this exist in a handful of places worldwide. Burgess Shale, Liaoning, Ediacara, sites where preservation was so perfect it crossed into impossible, where the fossils are too complete, too aware. The scientific community doesn't discuss it because there's no framework for understanding. How do you study something that studies you back? She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo. The feathered fossil Nolan had found before his disappearance. Except in this image, the feathers were arranged differently, like wings folding. I took this picture 3 days ago. I took another this morning. The structure changed, Ranger. Bones don't do that, but these did. I've locked the specimen in a climate-controlled vault, but I hear it sometimes, scratching, like it's trying to get out. She pocketed the phone. The university is shutting down the project. Nolan's permit is revoked. The excavation site will be filled and closed. Officially, for budget reasons. Unofficially, because everyone involved is terrified of what we found. I asked what would happen to the fossils in Cross's cache. She shook her head. FBI seized everything. They'll probably end up in federal storage, forgotten, which is probably for the best. Some knowledge is too dangerous. Some doors are better left closed. She stood to leave, then paused. My grandmother was Hopi. She told me that the earth has memory, that when things die in certain places, under certain conditions, the land holds them, not gently, not peacefully. It holds them the way a clenched fist holds a stone. And when someone opens that fist, the stone doesn't fall. It flies, aimed at whoever was foolish enough to disturb it. After she left, I lay in the dark listening to machines beep and wondering how many other chambers existed out there in the Badlands. How many fossil hunters had found them over the decades and either died or stayed silent? The archive references suddenly made sense. Eugene Cross, who'd sealed the lower passage and tried to warn others. The geology students, one of whom fell into a sinkhole that search teams couldn't find because it was a shaft someone had deliberately hidden. Ranger Morris, who'd noted unusual geological formations and been told to drop the investigation. All of them had touched something that shouldn't be touched. All of them paid a price. They released me the next morning with instructions to rest and avoid strenuous activity. I drove straight to the ranger station instead. My supervisor, Chief Hendricks, a Zuni woman with 30 years in the service, met me in her office with coffee and a folder thick with reports. FBI's closing the case. Nolan Keene will face charges for illegal excavation and trafficking. Dr. Salazar's program is under investigation. The university is cooperating fully. The site is sealed. Everything wrapped up neat. She slid the folder across her desk. Except none of it explains what you saw down there. I'd filed a preliminary report from the hospital, sticking to observable facts. Chamber, fossils, rescue. No mention of moving bones or entities that pass through me like cold wind. Hendricks had read between the lines. You're not the first ranger to come back from the Devil's Spine with a story that doesn't fit the paperwork. I've read Morris's memo. I've read incident reports going back to the 20s. Whatever's out there, it's been there longer than the park, longer than the Navajo Nation, longer than any human presence in this desert. And every few decades, someone gets curious enough or greedy enough to disturb it. She opened a drawer and pulled out a leather journal, worn and water-stained. Kathleen Morris gave me this before she retired in '93. She made me promise to pass it to whoever needed it next. I guess that's you now. I opened the journal carefully. Morris's handwriting filled the pages, entries spanning her entire career. Most were mundane. Patrol observations. Weather notes. But scattered throughout were references to the Devil's Spine, descriptions of sounds, sensations, the feeling of being watched by something that understood human presence better than it should, and a theory developed over years of investigation. Morris believed the chamber was a natural trap from the Triassic period, a place where animals fell or were washed in during floods and couldn't escape. They died together, dozens of creatures, their bodies packed into mineral-rich sediment that preserved them with unusual completeness. But the preservation did more than create fossils. It created a record so detailed it captured something of their final moments, their fear, their rage, their desperate attempts to escape. And that emotional imprint remained, locked in the stone, waiting for contact to activate it. Not supernatural, just a natural phenomenon we didn't have the science to explain yet. She tried to get the site officially closed, but the Park Service couldn't justify the cost without proof of danger. People didn't die there frequently enough to warrant action. They just disappeared, and disappearances could be explained by natural hazards, heat, dehydration, getting lost. Morris had spent years placing warning signs and marker stones around the area, trying to discourage exploration. But signs weather, stones get moved, and people who want to find something badly enough will ignore any warning. Eventually, she'd given up active intervention and settled for documentation, building a record for whoever came after her. The question now, Hendricks said, is what you do with that information. FBI doesn't want to hear about bones that move. The university wants to forget this happened. Navajo Nation is happy to let federal authorities handle it. You could file Morris's journal, add your report, and let the next generation deal with it when someone else disappears. That's what I'd recommend officially. Unofficially, I'll support whatever decision you make. She stood. Take a few days. Think about it. This job has a way of showing us things we can't explain. How we respond defines whether we can keep doing the work. I took the journal home to my trailer on the edge of park housing. That night, I read every entry Morris had written about the Devil's Spine. She'd been thorough, documenting not just her own experiences, but interviewing anyone who'd been to the area. A prospector in 1979 who'd heard singing coming from underground. A hiker in 1985 who'd felt compelled to dig at a specific spot, finding bones that looked at him. A Navajo elder in 91 who'd told Morris that his grandfather spoke of the angry place where the old world remembers being alive. Dozens of accounts, all dismissed individually as superstition or misperception, but together forming a pattern impossible to ignore. Morris had also documented physical evidence. Photographs of excavation sites that showed bones partially emerged from matrix, positioned as if climbing out. Soil samples with mineral compositions that didn't match surrounding geology. Audio recordings of sounds captured near the shaft, including what her notes described as exhalations without breath, rhythmic and purposeful. She'd sent samples to geologists and paleontologists who'd confirmed the anomalies but offered no explanations beyond unusual preservation conditions. The scientific community didn't want to touch something that implied consciousness in fossilized remains. The journal's final entry, dated January 1993, laid out Morris's conclusion. I have spent 12 years trying to understand the devil's spine. I've ruled out hoaxes, mass hallucination, and environmental factors. What remains is this. Some sites carry imprints of trauma so intense that the physical structure of stone preserves not just organic material but the emotional state of dying organisms. We don't have language for this phenomenon because Western science separates mind from matter, but indigenous traditions understand that everything carries memory. Water, stone, bone. And when conditions align, that memory can interact with the present, not as ghosts, as geology, as mineralized consciousness that reacts to disturbance the way any trapped thing reacts when something approaches its cage. I set the journal aside and pulled up my own photos from the rescue. Images of the chamber walls covered in fossils. Close-ups of skeletal structures that showed those impossible features. Proto-feathers in the wrong epoch. Limb positions that suggested climbing rather than swimming. Open jaws frozen mid-scream. I zoomed in on one photo, examining the matrix around a skull. The stone showed stress fractures radiating outward, as if something inside had pushed against its prison. Recent fractures, not millions of years old, created days or weeks ago when Nolan had first entered the chamber. My phone buzzed. Text from Ray Ortega. FBI seized all physical evidence. No charges against you for unauthorized entry. Consider yourself lucky. Stay away from that site. I replied, asking what they'd found in the lower chamber. 3 dots pulsed, then vanished. No response. He'd been warned to stay silent, or he'd seen something that made him want to forget. Either way, the official narrative was set. Illegal fossil poaching. Tragic accident. Case closed. The fact that Nolan was still talking about bones that moved would be attributed to trauma and pain medication. The fact that I'd felt those same bones pass through me would never make it into any report. 3 days later, Nolan called from the hospital. His voice was stronger, clearer, but carried an edge of obsession I recognized from Morris's descriptions. They won't let me near the specimens. FBI has everything locked down. But I need to know, Ranger. Did you see them move, or did I hallucinate the whole thing? I could lie, should lie. But I remembered the cold passing through me, the ancient rage, and I couldn't dismiss his experience. I saw something. What it was, I don't know. But you weren't hallucinating. Silence on the line, then a long exhale. Thank you. They're trying to take my credentials, calling me unstable. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. I asked what he planned to do. He laughed bitterly. What can I do? No university will touch me after this. My career's over, But I have photos, notes. That feathered specimen I showed Dr. Salazar, I made a silicone mold before I left for the Devil's Spine. It's in my storage unit in Flagstaff. The mold captures details the original fossil lost when it started moving. If I can publish, even if it's self-published online, someone else can verify, someone else can investigate properly. He paused. Or maybe that's exactly what shouldn't happen. Maybe Cross was right. Maybe some things are meant to stay buried. Before I could respond, voices echoed in the background. Doctors. He said he had to go and ended the call. I sat with the phone in my hand, thinking about his storage unit, about a silicone mold that captured impossible structures, about evidence that could rewrite scientific understanding or destroy whoever tried to share it. Morris had spent years collecting proof, and it hadn't changed anything. The system didn't want to know, wanted comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, but evidence had a way of surviving, stored in journals, hidden in lockers, preserved in the memories of people who'd seen what shouldn't exist. I made a decision. I photocopied Morris's journal, making 3 sets. One I mailed to myself at a post office box I rented under a different name. One I sealed in a waterproof container and buried near a landmark only I knew. One I gave to Hendricks with instructions to pass it on when I retired or died, whichever came first. The original I returned to her office safe. Then I compiled my own file. Photos, GPS coordinates, timeline, Nolan's contact information. Everything organized and documented the way Morris had taught me. Not for now, for later, for the next person who'd need it. 4 months passed. The excavation site remained closed, surrounded by new fencing and signs warning of unstable ground. Nolan's charges were reduced to trespassing. He pled guilty, paid a fine, and disappeared from public view. Dr. Salazar's program lost federal funding. The university quietly retired her with full benefits and a non-disclosure agreement. Jerome, the photographer, sold his equipment and opened a camera shop in Phoenix. The Hatch twins finished their degrees and took jobs with oil companies in Texas. Everyone scattered, carrying pieces of the story but no complete picture. Exactly how these things always ended. Except Hendricks called me into her office in February with news. Navajo Nation Rangers reported unusual activity near the Devil's Spine. Tourists ignoring closure signs. Someone's been posting coordinates online, calling it the Fossil Hunter's Secret. We're getting inquiries about permits for the area. This is going to become a problem. I asked if she wanted me to patrol there. She shook her head. I want you to consider something else. A position opened with the Paleontological Resources Division. Federal oversight of fossil sites across multiple parks. Better pay, more authority, and you'd be in position to monitor places like the Devil's Spine across the Southwest. I understood what she was offering. A chance to do what Morris couldn't. Move beyond one park and watch for patterns across a wider territory. Document sites. Place warnings. Build a network of rangers who knew what to look for and how to respond when people started disappearing for reasons that didn't fit the official narrative. It meant giving up field work for bureaucracy, trading boots and dust for offices and meetings. But it meant the next Nolan Keene might get warnings before they descended into chambers that shouldn't be disturbed. I accepted. My first month in the new position, I requested historical data on disappearances in parks with significant fossil deposits. Dinosaur National Monument, Badlands, Fossil Butte, Florissant. The pattern emerged within days. Every site had its own version of the Devil's Spine. Places where fossil hunters went missing at rates higher than statistical norms. Places where local rangers quietly avoided certain areas without official justification. places where the geology showed those same unusual mineral compositions Morris had documented. I marked them on a master map, creating the network she'd started decades ago. I also reached out to Nolan. He'd been living in a small apartment in Albuquerque, working part-time at a rock shop, keeping his head down. When I explained what I was doing, he was silent for a long moment. Then, "You're going to try to protect them? The chambers?" I said I was going to try to protect people from the chambers. He laughed. "Good luck with that. But if you need consultation on identification, on knowing what makes a fossil site wrong, I'll help. Off the books, no paper trail. I owe you that much for pulling me out of that hole." We met twice a year after that, always in anonymous locations. Truck stops, coffee shops, trading notes like spies in a Cold War movie. He'd review my photos, telling me which sites showed the stress fractures in matrix that indicated trapped consciousness, which formations had the mineral composition that created those impossible preservation conditions. He'd also follow up on collectors, tracking illegal sales of specimens from protected sites, alerting me when someone acquired fossils that felt wrong. He never explained what he meant by that. I didn't ask. Some understanding came from experience too dark to put into words. 3 years into the position, a ranger in Dinosaur National Monument called me about an incident. A paleontologist had entered a newly exposed quarry and emerged 6 hours later claiming the bones had moved. The park had dismissed it as heat exhaustion. But the ranger, a Ute woman named Sarah Red Crow, had read Morris's journal after I'd circulated it through unofficial channels. She'd photographed the quarry and sent me images that showed the same signs. Open jaws, climbing positions, stress fractures in matrix. I flew out the next day. The quarry was already sealed by the time I arrived, but Sarah had her own photos. We compared them to images taken a month earlier during the initial exposure. Bones had shifted, not dramatically, just enough to notice if you looked carefully. Positions that suggested testing range of motion. The paleontologist, a quiet man named Dr. Howard, spoke to me privately. "I've worked fossil sites for 20 years. I know what dead bone looks like. What I saw in there wasn't dead, it was waiting, and when I touched it, it remembered being alive. Not a hallucination, Ranger. I felt it pass through me, cold and angry and trapped." His voice shook. "There are places we shouldn't dig, things we shouldn't disturb. This is one of them." I wrote a report recommending the quarry remain closed, citing geological instability and visitor safety concerns. Federal oversight agreed without investigation. The site was sealed with concrete, which seemed to be the standard response to problems that couldn't be explained. Bury them, literally and figuratively. I added dinosaur to my map and moved on to the next incident, and the next. Over the years, the map filled with markers. Red circles, like Nolan's original map had shown, except now I knew what they meant. Not treasure sites, warning sites. Places where the boundary between fossil and something else had worn thin. Nolan died in 2019. Heart attack. Sudden. He was only 53. I flew to Albuquerque for the funeral. Almost no one attended. His career had ended in disgrace, and few remembered the discoveries he'd made before everything fell apart. At the service, a lawyer handed me a key. Nolan's storage unit. He'd left it to me in his will, along with a note. "You'll know what to do with this. Trust your instincts, and remember what Cross wrote. Some things are meant to stay buried, but the evidence shouldn't be. Someone, someday, will have the framework to understand. Make sure they can find it." The storage unit held 20 years of documentation. Field notes from every dig Nolan had worked. Photographs of specimens that showed impossible features. The silicone mold of the feathered fossil, details preserved in rubber that the original had lost, papers he'd tried to publish and been rejected, audio recordings of sounds captured in chambers worldwide, all sharing that rhythmic breathing quality, and copies of maps, dozens of them, red circles marking sites across 6 continents. The problem was global, not just the American Southwest. Anywhere exceptional preservation occurred created the risk of something being preserved too well. I integrated his data with mine, creating a database I stored on encrypted drives with backups in multiple locations. Morris's journal, my field reports, Nolan's life work. Sarah Redcrow added her own notes from Ute oral traditions about places where stone dreams of flesh. Other rangers contributed as word spread quietly through professional networks. We called ourselves nothing, had no official organization, just a loose network of people who'd seen something that contradicted consensus reality and refused to pretend otherwise. We monitored, documented, warned, and occasionally sealed sites before someone else could disturb them. The work continues. Even now, as I write this from my office in Albuquerque, reports come in. A museum curator in Cleveland describing specimens that seem to track movement in their gallery. A paleontology student in Mongolia requesting advice about bones that sing at certain frequencies. A park ranger in South Africa asking if I've heard of fossils that remember dying. I respond to each one, sharing what we've learned, adding their observations to the growing database. The framework for understanding doesn't exist yet, but the evidence accumulates, waiting for a generation of scientists willing to question whether death truly ends all activity or whether it simply transforms it into something mineral and patient. I returned to the Devil's Spine last month. First time since the rescue. The site was still fenced, though weather had torn sections. I walked the perimeter, noting new offerings. Carved stones, crystals, prayer bundles. Locals knew, even if they didn't have language for it. They understood the place required respect, required acknowledgement that something rested here that didn't rest easily. I left my own offering, a small carved piece of petrified wood Elena Vasquez had given me years ago during the Henry Callan investigation. A reminder that boundaries exist for reasons we're only beginning to understand. Standing there, I felt it again. The pressure, the sense of vast awareness trapped in stone. But also something else. Curiosity. As if the chamber and its contents wondered who we were, these carbon-based creatures that disturbed their mineral sleep. As if they wanted to understand us as much as we wanted to understand them. Communication across evolutionary gulfs, geological time, and the boundary between life and whatever comes after. Not hostile, necessarily, just fundamentally alien. Operating on timescales that made human concern seem like mayfly flickers. I think about Nolan sometimes, sitting in that chamber with a broken leg, listening to them. The rage he described was real, but so was the patience, the willingness to wait millions of years for the right conditions, for contact with something warm and fleeting, for the chance to share what they'd experienced when volcanic ash fell and the world they knew ended in suffocating darkness. They weren't evil, just trapped, and anything trapped long enough becomes desperate, becomes dangerous, not through malice but through the simple mathematics of pressure finding release. The Cherokee teach that everything has spirit. Stone, water, bone. The mineral world participates in consciousness differently than flesh, but no less truly. What I've seen in the Devil's Spine and places like it confirms what my ancestors knew. Fossils aren't inert remains. They're records. And records, under the right conditions, play back. Sometimes in ways that hurt the listener. Sometimes in ways that change them. Always in ways that demand respect for the deep time they represent and the trauma encoded in their structure. This account will be added to Morris's journal and Nolan's files, sealed in multiple locations, distributed through the network, not as evidence for the skeptical world, but as a map for future rangers who will encounter their own versions of the Devil's Spine. A guide to recognition, to response, to understanding that our job isn't just protecting parks from visitors, but sometimes protecting visitors from what the parks contain. The ancient memory locked in stone, the rage of extinction preserved in mineral, the patience of geological time waiting for the right moment to remind carbon-based life how temporary its dominance truly is. If you're reading this, you've already encountered something that doesn't fit the official narrative. Trust your experience. Document everything. Build the network. And remember that the map Nolan drew wasn't showing treasure sites. It was showing boundaries between our world and something older. Something that survived extinction by becoming the very stone that marked its passing. Something that waits in chambers deep below the desert floor, dreaming mineral dreams and remembering when it moved under living muscle instead of being moved by academic curiosity. The desert keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its warnings. The marker stones aren't graves. They're memorials to everyone who didn't listen, to everyone who believed human understanding trumped natural boundaries, to everyone who opened chambers that should have stayed sealed. My name is on those stones now, in spirit, if not in carved letters. I opened the chamber, I felt what passed through me, and I carry that cold memory like a stone in my chest, reminding me that some knowledge comes at a cost measured in more than time or money or career. The fossil map exists, multiple copies in multiple locations, ready for whoever needs it next. Ready for the day when science catches up to what rangers and indigenous peoples have known for generations. That the Earth remembers. That memory takes many forms, and that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for both the dead and the living is to let them rest undisturbed in the stone that holds them. The desert taught me that. The fossils taught me that. And every person who disappeared into the Devil's Spine taught me that. I just hope I learned the lesson well enough to help others avoid repeating their mistakes. The coordinates remain in my files. The chamber is still there, waiting beneath marker stones and warning signs that weather and time will eventually erase. Someone else will find it someday. Someone else will descend. Someone else will feel that cold pass through them and carry back a story no one believes. And when they do, this document will be waiting. A thread connecting past to present to future. A map not of treasure but of terror. A warning written in fossils and human names, and the patient rage of stone that remembers being alive and wants nothing more than to forget. My name is Levi Dunbar, and this happened to me in 2013 in Petrified Forest National Park, Arizona. I'm Cherokee through my mother's bloodline, raised on the belief that darkness reveals what daylight hides. I work the night patrol, the shift most rangers avoid because it means 12 hours alone in a landscape that looks alien under starlight. The petrified logs cast shadows like fallen giants. The badlands glow silver and black. Wind carries sounds that have no source. Most people fear the dark. I've learned to respect it. There's a difference. That September, the university permits came through for overnight geological surveys. Dr. Marcus Hale's team from Arizona State needed darkness to use specialized equipment that measured thermal signatures in ancient stone. Something about how different minerals retained heat from daylight and released it at different rates during the night. The data would help them map subsurface structures without excavation. It sounded reasonable on paper. 5 students, 3 nights, supervised research in designated areas. I approved the permits and briefed them on safety protocols. Stay within marked zones. Carry radios. Check in every 2 hours. The desert forgives nothing after dark, especially in September when temperatures swing from 90 degrees at sunset to 40 by midnight. Ava Merrick was the youngest member of Hale's team, a grad student working on her thesis about Triassic sediment layers. She had that combination of intelligence and recklessness that made me nervous. During the safety briefing, while the other students took notes, she asked about accessing areas off the main trails. Specifically, a formation called the Three Sisters, a cluster of hoodoos about 4 miles into the backcountry. I told her it was outside the permitted zone. She argued that thermal readings there could confirm her hypothesis about ancient river channels. Dr. Hale cut her off, reminding her that permits were non-negotiable. She nodded, but her eyes held that look I'd seen before. The look that said rules were suggestions for people who lacked vision. The first night went smoothly. I did my patrol rounds, checking on the team at their designated sites near the Painted Desert overlook. They worked with quiet efficiency, setting up tripods and sensors, recording data in LED-lit notebooks. Ava was there, following protocol, though she kept glancing south toward the backcountry where the Three Sisters stood invisible in darkness. At 2 a.m., everyone checked in via radio. At 4 a.m., the same. By dawn, they'd pack their equipment and return to the research station for sleep. Dr. Hale thanked me for the smooth operation. I filed my report and went home to my trailer, satisfied that the second night would be equally uneventful. I was wrong. Night 2 started differently. Clouds moved in from the west, thick enough to obscure the moon, the kind of darkness where your headlamp creates a tunnel through nothing, and everything beyond that tunnel ceases to exist. I began my rounds at 9 p.m., driving the patrol route slowly, checking gates and trailheads. At the Painted Desert site, I found 4 students setting up equipment, not 5. I radioed Dr. Hale at the research station. He did a head count and confirmed. Ava Merrick wasn't there. She'd left the station at 7 p.m. saying she needed to pre-position some equipment for better readings. She should have arrived an hour ago. I asked which direction she'd headed. Hale's voice went tight. South, toward the backcountry. I grabbed my emergency pack and headed into the darkness on foot. The terrain beyond the paved roads required either hiking or high-clearance vehicles, and my patrol truck wouldn't make it. I followed the backcountry trail using night vision goggles that turned the world into shades of green and gray. The petrified logs looked like bones in that false light, ancient and wrong. Wind picked up, carrying grit that stung exposed skin. I called Ava's name every few minutes. No response, just wind and my own breathing loud in my ears. At the 2-mile mark, I found her first equipment cache, a tripod, a sensor array, left beside the trail as if she'd meant to retrieve them later. But no Ava. I continued south, pushing harder now. The Three Sisters formation appeared gradually, 3 tall hoodoos shaped by millions of years of erosion, standing like sentinels over a shallow basin. At the base of the nearest hoodoo, I found her second cache. A backpack, water bottles, a notebook, and her camera, a professional-grade video camera still powered on, red recording light blinking in the darkness. I checked the backpack first. No ID, no phone, just geological tools and sample bags. The camera's viewfinder showed the last recorded image frozen on the screen. A rock face, the side of one of the Three Sisters, lit by a headlamp beam. I pressed play. The video started normally, Ava's voice narrating as she filmed. 22:47 hours, approaching the eastern sister. The stratification here is incredible. You can see the transition layers from the Chinle Formation, each color representing a different depositional event. Red for iron oxide, purple for manganese. That green band is copper mineralization, which shouldn't be this pronounced unless... She moved closer to the rock face, camera steady. Wait, there's an opening. A fissure I didn't see on the surveys. It runs vertical, maybe 8 inches wide, and there's airflow. I can feel it. The camera tilted as she leaned toward the opening. Darkness beyond. Then her voice quieter. I'm going to get a closer look. The video shook as she set the camera down, angling it toward the fissure. Her shadow passed across the frame as she moved off screen. For 10 seconds, nothing. Just the rock face and the sound of wind. Then a sharp crack. A gasp. The image jolted as something impacted the camera, knocking it sideways. The view shifted to show only darkness and a strip of ground lit by the fallen headlamp. Ava's voice strained. Oh God, oh no! Scraping sounds, like something being dragged across stone. Then silence. The camera ran for another 30 seconds, recording nothing but darkness and wind before the battery died. Timestamp, 22:51 hours. 4 minutes of footage. Somewhere in those 4 minutes, Ava Merrick had vanished. I radioed for emergency response immediately. Search and rescue, medical support, every available ranger. While I waited, I examined the area around the Three Sisters using my flashlight and night vision. The ground showed scuff marks leading to the fissure Ava had mentioned. I approached carefully, testing each step. The opening was there, exactly as she'd described. A vertical crack in the hoodoo's base, narrow enough that a slender person could slip through if they turned sideways. I shone my light inside. The fissure opened into a larger cavity, maybe 10 feet deep, the floor covered in loose rock and sand. No sign of Ava. But the sand showed disturbance. Drag marks, leading to the back of the cavity where another opening, smaller and angled downward, descended into darkness. I should have waited for backup. That's protocol. That's common sense. But Ava might be injured, bleeding, trapped in some subsurface chamber, and every minute mattered. I squeezed through the fissure, grateful for the Cherokee tradition of staying lean. Inside the cavity, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. The air smelled of minerals and something organic. Decay, maybe, though I couldn't identify what. The drag marks led to the rear opening, which was barely 2 feet wide. I called down into it. Ava, can you hear me? My voice echoed strangely, bouncing off surfaces I couldn't see. No response. I radioed my position and intention to continue, knowing the signal might not reach the surface once I descended. Then I squeezed into the lower opening. The passage angled down at 45 degrees, tight enough that I had to crawl on my stomach, pushing my pack ahead. Claustrophobia isn't something I usually struggle with, but this was different. The stone pressed from all sides. The ceiling scraped my back. My headlamp showed only a few feet of passage before it curved and descended further. I focused on breathing, on moving forward, on the fact that Ava had come this way and I couldn't abandon her. After 20 feet of crawling, the passage widened slightly. I could raise my head, see that the tunnel opened into a larger space ahead. I pushed forward and emerged into a chamber. The chamber was roughly circular, about 15 feet across, with a ceiling high enough to stand. My headlamp beam revealed walls covered in crystalline deposits that glittered like stars. Gypsum, probably, formed over thousands of years as water seeped through the rock. Beautiful and utterly wrong. This chamber shouldn't exist. The geological surveys had shown no subsurface voids in this area. Yet, here I was, standing in a space carved by water millions of years ago, sealed until erosion had created the fissure Ava found. I swept the light across the floor, searching for any sign of her. What I found instead made my breath catch. Blood, not a pool, a trail. Dark droplets leading across the chamber floor toward another opening on the far side. I followed it, moving carefully, scanning for Ava or any indication of what had injured her. The blood trail led to a place where the chamber floor dropped away into a pit. I approached the edge and looked down. The pit descended at least 30 feet, maybe more, my light not reaching the bottom. The walls were smooth, worn by ancient water flow. No handholds, no way to climb down safely without ropes, and at the edge, pressed into soft sand, a handprint. Ava's hand, judging by the size. She'd been here, she'd looked down. And then what? Fallen, jumped, been pulled? I radioed again, explaining what I'd found. Static answered. I was too deep. Too much rock between me and the surface. I was alone with a blood trail in a pit, and questions that made my skin crawl. I secured a glow stick to my pack and dropped it into the pit, watching it fall and bounce until it settled at the bottom. A small, green light in darkness. The fall was roughly 35 feet. Survivable if you landed right. Fatal if you didn't. And from this angle, I could see something else, a shape at the bottom. Human-sized. Not moving. I made a decision that would haunt me regardless of outcome. I had climbing rope, I had anchor points, I could descend. Or I could retreat and wait for search and rescue with proper equipment, knowing that every minute of delay might be the difference between life and death for Ava Merrick. I chose descent. I anchored my rope to the sturdiest rock formation, tested it with my full weight, and began rappelling into the pit. The walls were slick, covered in that same crystalline deposit, offering no grip. I descended slowly, boots slipping, relying entirely on the rope. Halfway down, my headlamp flickered. The battery was dying. I had a spare, but changing it while suspended in a pit seemed like a good way to drop it into darkness. I kept descending, watching the light weaken, praying it would last until I reached bottom. At 20 feet, the beam died completely. I hung in perfect blackness, hearing only my own breathing and the creak of rope fibers. Above, the entrance to the chamber was invisible. Below, the glow stick provided barely enough light to see shadows. I continued down, counting hand lengths of rope, until my boots touched solid ground. I fumbled for my spare headlamp, fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and clicked it on. The beam illuminated the pit floor and the shape I'd seen from above. Ava Merrick. She lay on her side, one arm bent at a wrong angle, face pale in the harsh light. I moved to her immediately, checking for pulse. There, weak but present. She was alive, unconscious but breathing. I did a quick trauma assessment. Broken arm, possible head injury, blood matting her hair on the left side, scrapes and bruises, but alive. I'd found her alive. I pulled out my emergency blanket and wrapped her, then tried the radio one more time. Nothing. We were at the bottom of a pit, inside a chamber, inside a hoodoo. No signal would reach us here. I had two choices: stay with Ava and hope search and rescue found my trail, or climb back up and guide them to this location. I chose to stay. You don't leave an unconscious person with a head injury alone in the dark. I made Ava as comfortable as possible, elevated her broken arm, and settled in to wait. My headlamp cast strange shadows on the pit walls. The crystalline deposits caught the light and threw it back in fractured patterns. I studied the space, noting details I'd missed during the descent. The pit wasn't natural. Not entirely. Someone had been here before. Old rope anchors drilled into the rock, empty water bottles in a crevice. Food wrappers. This wasn't an undiscovered void. Someone had found it years ago, maybe decades ago, and they'd left traces of exploration that had been forgotten or deliberately hidden from official surveys. Ava stirred around 3 a.m. Her eyes opened, unfocused, then locked on my face with confusion. "Ranger Dunbar?" Her voice was hoarse. Where are we?" I explained, as gently as possible. The chamber, the pit, her fall. She tried to sit up, gasped at the pain from her arm, and lay back down. I don't remember falling. I remember the fissure, the chamber, and then... She frowned, struggling. There was something, a sound, like rocks shifting. I turned, and the floor just gave way. I didn't have time to catch myself. She looked up at the pit entrance, visible as a slightly lighter circle of darkness. "How did you find me?" I told her about the camera, the video, the trail I'd followed. She closed her eyes. "Dr. Hale is going to kill me if I survive this." I went off permit into restricted backcountry, broke every safety rule. I assured her we'd worry about that later, after we got her out safely. She laughed weakly. "You came down here alone? That's against protocol too, isn't it?" I admitted it was. She opened her eyes again, studying my face. "Why?" I thought about my answer carefully, about the friend I'd lost years ago during a botched rescue, about the oath I'd taken to protect this land and everyone on it. Because leaving someone alone in the dark isn't something I can do. Cherokee or Ranger. Both traditions say you go after your people. We sat in that darkness for another hour before I heard voices above. Search and rescue calling my name. I shouted back, voice hoarse from dehydration and dust. Within minutes, they'd set up proper rigging. A rescue basket descended on steel cables, professional equipment that made my single rope look foolish in comparison. They pulled Ava up first, secured and stable, her broken arm splinted by a paramedic who'd rappelled down to assist. Then they hauled me up, emerging into the chamber to find 8 Rangers and 2 EMTs crowded around portable lights that turned the crystalline walls into a cathedral of reflected brilliance. Ray Ortega, the incident commander, gripped my shoulder as I unclipped from the harness. "Reckless, Dunbar, but effective. She'd be dead if you'd waited." He gestured at the chamber. "Also, this space isn't on any of our maps. You just discovered a significant geological feature. Park Service is going to want detailed surveys after they finish yelling at both of you for going off book." I nodded, too exhausted to care about reprimands. Ava was alive. That was what mattered. Everything else was paperwork and politics. They evacuated Ava through the fissure on a backboard, a slow process that required careful maneuvering through tight passages. I followed with the equipment, watching as the desert sky shifted from black to gray to pink. Dawn breaking over the painted desert, painting the Badlands in shades of rose and gold, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. The ambulance took Ava to Holbrook Hospital. I gave my statement to Ray while sitting in my patrol truck drinking coffee that tasted like dust and exhaustion. He recorded everything, then asked the question I'd been dreading. "Did you see anything down there that explains how she fell? Structural failure? Loose floor?" I thought about the blood trail, the handprint at the pit's edge, the way Ava said the floor had given way suddenly. The chamber floor looked stable where I walked, but she was at the pit edge. Maybe that section was undermined, or maybe she just stepped wrong in the dark. Ray made notes. "We'll get engineers down there for a full assessment. Can't have hidden voids opening under people's feet. Park could be liable." He closed his notebook. "Go sleep. You've been up for 20 hours straight. I'll handle the university and their permits. This is going to create paperwork nightmares for weeks." I drove home but couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the video, Ava's voice saying, "There's something." The crack, the gasp, the camera falling. I'd watched it a dozen times now, and something bothered me. A detail I couldn't quite identify. I pulled out my phone and transferred the video file from Ava's camera, which I'd bagged as evidence. Watched it again, frame by frame. There, right before the crack. A shadow. Quick. Passing across the rock face behind Ava. Just for a fraction of a second. Too fast to be her shadow. Wrong angle for that, anyway. Something else had been in that chamber when she fell. I called Ray, described what I'd seen. He was quiet for a long moment. Could be another person, someone who ran when she fell, or could be a trick of the light. That headlamp beam was moving around a lot. Shadows do strange things in confined spaces. I knew he was right. Knew I was probably seeing patterns where none existed. The human brain's tendency to find meaning in chaos, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the video was hiding more than it revealed. Ray promised to have the forensics team analyze it properly. I thanked him and tried again to sleep. 3 hours of restless unconsciousness later, I woke to my phone buzzing. Dr. Marcus Hale. I answered. His voice was tight, professional, angry underneath. Ranger Dunbar, I've just spoken with Ava at the hospital. She claims she saw someone else in that chamber, a figure standing in the shadows. She says that's what startled her, made her step backward, made her fall. But that's impossible. My entire team was accounted for at the Painted Desert site, and no one else had overnight permits. I asked if Ava could describe the figure. She's not making sense. Says it looked like a shadow, but wrong. Taller than a person should be, not moving naturally. Ranger, she has a head injury, possible concussion. I don't think we can trust her perceptions of what happened in that chamber. After hanging up, I sat in my trailer staring at the wall. 2 people now saying they'd seen something. Ava with her own eyes. Me on the video footage. Both could be explained rationally. Head injury, light tricks, shadows. But together, they formed a pattern. I pulled up park incident reports going back 20 years, searching for similar events. Anything involving the 3 sisters or unexplained falls in backcountry areas. What I found made my mouth go dry. 11 incidents, scattered across 2 decades. Hikers reporting seeing figures in the darkness, equipment found but people missing. 1 body recovered with injuries consistent with a fall, but located miles from where they should have been. Every incident investigated. Every investigation concluding natural causes or user error. But together, they painted a picture of something recurring. Something centered around that cluster of hoodoos. I called Elena Martinez, a ranger who'd worked the park in the 90s before transferring to Saguaro. She was retired now, living in Tucson, but she'd been lead investigator on 3 of those incidents. She answered on the 4th ring, voice wary when I identified myself. Levi Dunbar. Henry Callan spoke highly of you before he transferred north. What can I do for you? I explained about Ava, the chamber, the figure. She was silent for a long time. When she spoke again, her tone had changed, careful, like someone approaching a nervous animal. The 3 sisters. I hoped we were done with that place. We closed it after the last incident in 2003, fenced the area, posted warnings. Did it help? I told her about finding Ava despite the closure, about the fissure that had opened, presumably recently, creating access that hadn't existed when the area was fenced. Elena cursed softly. Erosion. Deserts always changing. Revealing what was hidden, hiding what was visible. The 3 sisters have been trouble since before the park was established. Locals called them bad medicine. Said something lived in the stones. Not spirit, not ghost, just something that didn't want company. I investigated 6 incidents there personally. Never found evidence of another person. Never found animal tracks. Never found anything but confused witnesses and missing equipment. Eventually, I started believing the witnesses weren't confused. They were seeing exactly what they described. something that didn't want to be fully seen. I asked what she thought it was. She laughed, bitter. If I knew that, I'd have written a report that didn't sound insane. Best theory? The chambers under the Three Sisters create unusual acoustic and visual effects. Sound echoes in ways that seem directional. Shadows multiply and distort. Temperature variations create visual distortions, all perfectly natural phenomena that combine to make people think they're seeing figures. Combined with normal hazards like unstable floors, you get incidents that feel inexplicable but are really just bad luck and sensory confusion. That's the theory I put in reports. But privately, she paused. Privately, I think something about that formation attracts a certain type of person. Curious, boundary-pushing, the kind who explore where they shouldn't. And the desert has a way of punishing that curiosity, not maliciously, just indifferently. Same way a cliff punishes someone who steps too close to the edge. After we hung up, I drove back to the Three Sisters. Daylight made them look ordinary. Just eroded sandstone, shaped by wind and water, nothing sinister. The search and rescue team had marked their route with tape and stakes. I followed it to the fissure, now widened slightly by their passage. Inside, the chamber looked smaller in daylight filtering through the opening. Less cathedral, more hole in the ground. The blood trail I'd followed was still visible, dark against pale sand. I traced it to the pit, now secured with safety fencing. Yellow warning signs. A ranger guard posted to keep curious tourists away until the engineering assessment was complete. The guard was a seasonal employee named Marcus. A Hopi kid barely 20, eager and nervous. He'd heard about the rescue, asked questions about what the chamber looked like. I answered briefly, studying the space. In daylight, I could see what I'd missed in the dark. Footprints, multiple sets, more than just mine and Ava's. Older prints, partially eroded by time and air currents. Someone had been using this chamber regularly. Recently. Within the last month, based on the degradation. I took photos of the clearest prints, noting sizes and tread patterns. Then I explored the chamber perimeter looking for anything else out of place. In a crevice near the pit's edge, I found them. Cigarette butts. 3 of them. American Spirit brand. Relatively fresh, not weathered. Someone had stood here smoking, watching the pit, waiting for something or someone. I bagged them as evidence, then noticed something else. Scratches on the chamber wall. Fresh gouges in the soft stone. Not random, deliberate marks forming letters. I photographed them, then traced the words with my finger. She fell like the others. My blood went cold. This wasn't environmental hazard. This was something else entirely. Someone had been here, someone who knew about other falls, other victims, and they'd left a message. I radioed Ray immediately. He arrived with 2 investigators within the hour. They photographed everything, collected the cigarette butts, took samples of the scratched stone. One investigator, a woman named Sarah Locke, studied the message for a long time. This was carved recently, within a week. The exposed stone hasn't oxidized yet. She turned to me. Did Ava mention seeing anyone smoking in the area? Any vehicles parked nearby? I shook my head. She made notes. We're going to have to treat this as a criminal investigation now. Possible attempted murder. Someone lured her here or followed her here and pushed her. The message is either a confession or a taunt. The investigation expanded immediately. Forensics analyzed the cigarette butts for DNA. Security reviewed footage from park entrance cameras, looking for vehicles that entered after hours. Rangers interviewed Dr. Hale's entire team, checking alibis for the night Ava fell. I was pulled off patrol duty and assigned to assist the investigation. For 3 days, I did nothing but review evidence and interview potential witnesses. The park felt different during that time. tense, like everyone was watching everyone else, wondering who could have done this, wondering if it would happen again. The DNA results came back on day 4. The cigarette butts matched a profile in the criminal database. Dennis Sager, age 47. Previous arrests for trespassing on federal land and illegal artifact collection. Last known address in Holbrook. No current residence. Drifter. Survivalist. Known to camp illegally in remote areas. The profile included a note from petrified forest rangers. Sager had been banned from the park in 2009 after being caught stealing fossilized wood. He'd returned illegally multiple times since, evading rangers by camping in backcountry areas and moving frequently. The Three Sisters were one of his known camps. Ray called me into his office with Sarah Locke and an FBI agent named Morrison. They'd been reviewing old incident reports involving the Three Sisters. Morrison slid a folder across the desk. Dennis Sager has been a person of interest in 3 previous disappearances in this area, 1998, 2003, 2011, all cases involving young women who were last seen near the Hoodoo formations. No evidence linking him directly, no witnesses, no bodies recovered, but he was in the area during all 3 incidents. Living off the grid, avoiding rangers, we think he's been using the chamber system under the Three Sisters as a base camp, and when people stumble across his territory, he eliminates them, makes it look like accidents, falls, exposure, desert, claiming another victim. I asked about the message. She fell like the others. Morrison's expression was grim. Trophy. He's proud of what he's done, wants someone to know, but he's also arrogant. That message is going to be his downfall. We have his DNA, his pattern, his hiding place. We're going to find him. The plan was simple. Stake out the Three Sisters. Wait for Sager to return. He'd been scared off by the search and rescue activity, but eventually he'd come back. Drifters always returned to their camps. It was where they felt safe, where they kept their supplies. We'd be waiting when he did. I volunteered for the stakeout, partly because I knew the terrain, mostly because I wanted to look Sager in the eye and ask him why. Why target women? Why the Three Sisters? Why leave a message? Ray assigned me with 3 other rangers, rotating shifts. We set up observation posts with night vision equipment and thermal cameras. Waited. The desert at night became my entire world again. Watching shadows. Listening for footsteps. Scanning for any sign of movement that didn't belong. 4 days of nothing. Then, on the 5th night, thermal cameras picked up a heat signature approaching from the northwest. Single person. Moving cautiously. Using terrain for cover. We watched as the figure approached the Three Sisters, circled them once, then entered the fissure. Ray gave the signal. We moved in with night vision goggles and weapons drawn, surrounded the formation, called for the person to exit with hands visible. For 30 seconds, nothing. Then a voice from inside, male, rough from years of outdoor living. I know my rights. I'm on public land. You can't arrest me for camping. We told him to exit regardless. Another pause. Then he emerged. Dennis Sager looked exactly like his profile photo, just older. Weathered face, long gray hair, clothes patched and worn. He raised his hands, but his eyes were calculating, looking for escape routes. Ray read him his rights while 2 rangers handcuffed him. Morrison asked if he understood why he was being detained. Sager's smile was cold. Because some clumsy girl fell down a hole and you need someone to blame. I didn't touch her, wasn't even there. I was miles away that night. Morrison nodded. Then you won't mind explaining why your DNA is all over the chamber. Why you carved a message about her fall. Why 3 other women disappeared after encountering you in this exact location. Sager's expression shifted. Surprise, then calculation. He'd underestimated us. Thought he'd been careful enough. His lawyer would claim the cigarettes were planted, that anyone could carve a message and attribute it to him. But we had patterns, timelines, evidence that would be hard to explain away. As they loaded him into the patrol vehicle, he looked at me. Really looked. "You're the one who found her. Went down into that pit alone. That was stupid, Ranger. Could have fallen yourself. Could have died down there with her. Desert doesn't care about your Cherokee traditions or your rescue training. It just takes what it can get. I learned that lesson young. You will too, eventually." The trial took 8 months. Sager's defense argued coincidence. Bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. But forensics had matched fibers from his clothes to fibers found on Ava's torn jacket, had matched his boot prints to prints at the chamber, had documented his history of stalking women in remote areas. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before convicting him on attempted murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder in the previous disappearances. Sentenced to life without parole. The judge called him a predator who'd used the desert's natural dangers as weapons, exploiting isolation and darkness to hunt victims who'd never see him coming. Ava testified from a wheelchair, her arm still healing, her voice steady despite everything. She described seeing a figure in the shadows, feeling hands on her back, the sensation of being pushed. Sager sat emotionless through her testimony, but I saw his hands tighten when she identified him as the figure from the chamber. After sentencing, she found me outside the courthouse, shook my hand with her good arm. "Thank you for not listening to protocol, for coming after me." I told her any ranger would have done the same. She shook her head. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people follow rules even when rules fail. You followed something else, instinct, tradition, whatever it was. It saved my life." The Park Service sealed the chamber system under the Three Sisters permanently after the trial, filled the fissure with concrete, posted permanent warning signs, installed motion-activated cameras to detect anyone attempting to dig through the seal. The formations themselves remained visible from the trails, but access was forbidden. Dr. Hale's research permits were revoked indefinitely. The university issued formal apologies and implemented stricter supervision protocols for overnight fieldwork. Everything returned to normal officially. But some of us who'd been involved in the case knew that normal was a fiction we agreed to maintain for public consumption. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Elena Martinez called me. She'd been following the case through news reports and wanted to know the full story. I told her everything, including details that hadn't made it into media coverage. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. So it was human predation all along. Dennis Sager hunting women in the darkness, using the chambers as his killing ground. That should make me feel better. Should confirm that all those incidents I investigated were explainable. Human evil, not supernatural phenomena. But it doesn't. Because something about your story doesn't fit the pattern I remember. I asked what she meant. She chose her words carefully. The incidents I investigated in the 90s, the disappearances, they had common elements with your case, yes. Young women. The Three Sisters, nighttime. But there were differences too. The people who disappeared in my cases were experienced. Desert guides, researchers who'd worked in hostile environments. Not reckless grad students or tourists. They knew the risks, they followed protocols, and yet they vanished without trace. No bodies, no equipment, just gone. Sager was around during some of those incidents, but he was also just one drifter among many. The desert attracts people who don't fit anywhere else. Blaming him for every disappearance feels too convenient. I suggested that some cases might remain unsolved. Not every mystery has a villain. Sometimes people just die in the desert through miscalculation or bad luck. Elena agreed, but her tone suggested she wasn't convinced. Maybe Sager saw something that gave him the idea. Maybe he witnessed what happened to those early victims, how the desert claimed them, and decided to replicate it deliberately, use natural hazards as cover for murder. That would explain why his pattern matched environmental deaths so closely. He was copying what he'd seen the desert do naturally. It was a chilling theory. Sager, as a student of desert violence, learning from the land itself how to kill without leaving obvious evidence. I went back through the trial evidence after that conversation. Sager had never confessed, never explained his methodology. His lawyer had advised silence, and he'd followed that advice perfectly. But during my testimony, I'd described finding the old rope anchors in the pit, the water bottles, the food wrappers, evidence that the chamber had been used for years, maybe decades. The prosecution had attributed all of it to Sager, but we'd never carbon dated the materials, never confirmed how old they were. What if some of that evidence predated Sager's known presence in the area? What if he'd been using a space that others had used before him? I requested permission to re-examine the sealed chamber. Ray Ortega approved it reluctantly, assigning 2 rangers to accompany me. We drilled through the concrete seal carefully, creating an access point large enough for equipment but not people. We lowered a camera rig with the lights, recording everything. The chamber looked exactly as I remembered it. Crystalline walls. The pit with its safety fencing still in place. But we angled the camera differently this time, exploring areas I hadn't examined during the rescue. And we found something new. In the far corner of the chamber, hidden behind a rock outcropping, a space had been hollowed out deliberately. A shelter. Inside it, artifacts. A bedroll so old the fabric had rotted. Glass bottles with faded labels dating to the 1960s. A leather journal wrapped in oilcloth, preserved by dry air and darkness. We extended a retrieval arm, brought the journal up carefully. The cover was embossed with initials, AMT. The pages inside were filled with neat handwriting, dated entries spanning 1967 to 1969. Field notes from someone studying the geology of the 3 sisters. Someone who'd been living in the chamber, using it as a base for research. Someone who'd disappeared without anyone knowing they'd been here. The journal belonged to Alice Marie Thorne, a doctoral student from the University of Arizona. I found her records in archived university databases. She'd been working on a dissertation about erosion patterns in the Painted Desert. Her advisor's notes indicated she'd gone into the field in June 1967 and failed to return for a scheduled check-in. A search was conducted. No trace was found. She was eventually declared dead, presumed victim of heat exposure or flash flooding. Her research was never completed. Her body was never recovered. But here was her journal, proving she'd survived in the desert for at least 2 years after her disappearance, living in a hidden chamber, studying the formations, and documenting something else. The final entries in her journal were disturbing. She described seeing figures in the darkness, hearing voices that echoed strangely through the chambers, feeling watched constantly. At first, she attributed it to isolation-induced hallucinations, but as months passed, her observations became more detailed. She mapped the chamber system, discovering it was far more extensive than the single pit I'd explored. Multiple levels, connecting passages, a network carved by ancient water flow, and in the deepest level something she couldn't explain, a chamber where the temperature was 10 degrees colder than surrounding spaces, where sound behaved impossibly, creating echoes that arrived before the original sound, where she felt a presence that she described as aware and waiting. Her last entry, dated September 14, 1969, was brief. I'm going down to the cold chamber one final time. I need to understand what's there, what I've been hearing. If I don't return by nightfall, assume I was wrong about being able to navigate the passages safely. My research notes are cached in the western alcove. Someone should find them eventually. The Three Sisters aren't just geological formations. They're monuments. Markers for something buried deep, something that shouldn't be disturbed, but can't be left unexplored. The entry ended there. No signature, no conclusion, just silence stretching across 5 decades. We showed the journal to Ray and the investigating team. The consensus was that Alice Thorne had gone deeper into the chamber system and become lost or trapped. That exposure and dehydration had caused the hallucinations she described, that her death was tragic but explainable. But I read between the lines and saw a different story. She'd found something in those deep chambers, something that changed her perception of the Three Sisters, something that might explain why people continued to disappear in this area across generations. Not Sager, not environmental hazards. Something else, something patient and deep and unknown. I requested permission to explore the lower levels Alice had mapped. Ray denied it immediately. Too dangerous. The chambers were structurally unstable. We'd already found what we needed to find, her journal providing closure to a cold case. Further exploration would risk more lives for no clear benefit. I understood his reasoning, but felt frustrated. Alice had dedicated 2 years to studying something she believed was significant. Dismissing her observations as hallucination dishonored her work. But orders were orders. The chamber was resealed. The journal was archived. The case was closed again. And I returned to night patrol, watching the desert darkness and wondering what lay beneath it. Ava Merrick recovered fully over the following year. She switched her research focus away from petrified forest, completing her thesis using data from safer locations. But she stayed in touch, calling occasionally to check in. During one conversation, I mentioned Alice Thorne's journal. Ava was quiet for a moment, then said, "I need to tell you something. Something I didn't mention during the trial because I thought it would make me sound crazy. When I was lying at the bottom of that pit, before you arrived, I wasn't completely unconscious. I was drifting in and out. And during one of those conscious moments, I heard something. Not Sager. This was different. A voice. Female. Old. It said, 'You're lucky. He only pushed you. What's below does worse.' I thought it was delirium, head injury. But after hearing about Alice Thorne, I wonder if somehow I was hearing her. A recording in the stone. An echo that survived decades." I didn't know what to tell her. The rational explanation was obvious. Head trauma causing auditory hallucinations. But I'd seen enough in the desert to know that rationality didn't always account for experience. Some places carried memory. Some stones recorded trauma and played it back under the right conditions. Cherokee tradition spoke of this. Other indigenous cultures did too. Western science denied it because they couldn't measure it, couldn't replicate it in laboratories. But absence of proof wasn't proof of absence. Maybe Alice's final moments had been preserved somehow in the mineral structure of the cold chamber. Maybe Ava had briefly connected with that recording. Or maybe it was all coincidence and pattern-seeking. I told Ava that what she'd heard didn't matter less just because it couldn't be explained. Her experience was real, regardless of its source. 6 months later, Elena Martinez called again. She'd been diagnosed with lung cancer, prognosis not good, and wanted to discuss something before she ran out of time. "I lied to you when we first talked. Not about the incidents, those were real, but about what I thought caused them. I told you my official theory, the one I put in reports. But my real theory, the one I never shared with anyone, is this. The three sisters aren't dormant. They're active in a way we don't have vocabulary for. The chambers beneath them connect to something deeper, older, something that was there before the Triassic, before dinosaurs, before most of what we call Earth's history. And it's aware, not alive like we define life, but conscious, responding to intrusion, protecting itself by eliminating threats. She coughed, struggling for breath, then continued with a determination that belied her weakening condition. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the hospital bed, knuckles white with the effort of staying present, of forcing out truths that had festered in silence for 3 decades. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, casting shadows that seemed to deepen the lines etched across her weathered face. Each word came with visible effort, pulled from a reservoir of guilt and knowledge that had been carefully locked away behind professional duty and personal fear. I spent 30 years rationalizing what I saw, writing reports that blamed victims for their own deaths, attributing disappearances to human error, equipment failure, poor judgment, dehydration, anything but the truth that gnawed at me during every silent night patrol. But I can't die with that lie. I won't let that weight follow me beyond this world. The truth is, some places are thin. The boundary between our world and something else wears down over geological time, creating apertures, doorways, thresholds that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of physics and reality. The Three Sisters are one of those places, perhaps the most significant one in the entire Southwest. People who go there, especially people who dig or descend or disturb the stone, they're crossing a line that exists beyond mere physical trespass. They're violating a boundary that predates human concepts of property and permission. And something on the other side pushes back, not malevolently, not with hatred or anger or any emotion we'd recognize, just defensively, the way your immune system attacks infection without malice, without awareness of the individual cells it destroys. It's automatic, biological, fundamental. Sager killed Ava, yes. He was the instrument, the immediate cause. But he was also drawn there by the same force that drew Alice Thorne and all the others before her. The Three Sisters called to certain people. People with particular frequencies of mind, perhaps. People whose curiosity or desperation or spiritual openness makes them receptive to the pull emanating from those ancient stones. And most who answer don't come back. They descend into chambers that shift and change. They follow passages that lead deeper than any map suggests. And, somewhere in that darkness, they cross a threshold from which return becomes impossible. The hospital room felt colder as she spoke, as if her words themselves carried the chill she described. Outside, Phoenix sprawled in the desert heat, oblivious to the deathbed confession unfolding in this sterile space. I had driven 3 hours to hear what Elena Martinez needed to say, what she couldn't leave unsaid. The weight of her secrecy had eaten at her for decades, manifesting finally as the cancer that was now claiming her body with methodical efficiency. I asked if she'd ever gone into the deep chambers herself. She laughed, a wet sound that turned into a coughing fit. When she recovered, her eyes held a distant look, seeing not the hospital room, but some remembered darkness. Once, in '94, late September, when the tourists had thinned out and the other rangers were focused on the northern sections of the park, I found an entrance near the northern sister, a crack in the stone that opened into a descending passage. It wasn't marked on any official map, wasn't mentioned in any of the geological surveys, just there, waiting, like it had always been there and would always be there regardless of whether anyone found it. I told myself I was conducting a safety inspection, making sure no visitors could accidentally stumble into a dangerous area. But that was a lie. I went because I needed to know. Needed to understand what had taken so many people. Needed to see if Alice Thorne's journal entries, the ones I'd read in archived files, contained truth or delusion. She paused, gathering strength for what came next. I descended about 50 feet. The passage was smooth. Too smooth for natural erosion. The walls felt almost polished, like they'd been shaped by patient hands over impossible spans of time. The air temperature dropped precipitously, far more than depth alone could explain. And then I felt it, the cold Alice described, the bone-deep chill that has nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with proximity to something fundamentally other. The sense of being watched by something vast, not hostile, not welcoming, just aware, observing with an attention so complete, so focused, that it felt like physical pressure against my skin, my bones, my mind. I retreated immediately, scrambling back up that passage with a panic I'd never experienced before or since. I'd faced mountain lions. I'd pulled bodies from flash floods. I'd dealt with armed fugitives hiding in the park. None of that compared to the pure, existential terror I felt in that chamber. I filed no report, just sealed the entrance myself using a combination of stones and dirt and desperate hope that no one else would find what I'd found. I never went back, never told anyone, just carried it with me, the knowledge and the cowardice, for 30 years. Her breathing became more labored. The machines around her bed beeped with increasing frequency, registering the stress this confession placed on her failing system. But she pushed forward, determined to empty herself of truths before the end. I've regretted that cowardice every day since. Maybe if I'd pushed deeper, I could have found answers, real answers, evidence that could be documented and studied. But I was afraid. Not of dying. I'd accepted death as part of the ranger's contract with wilderness. I was afraid of understanding. Some truths are too big for human minds, too incompatible with our narrative of how reality works. We build our entire civilization on certain assumptions. That consciousness requires biology. That age implies decay. That Ayin is inert. What if those assumptions are wrong? What if consciousness can exist in forms we can't recognize? What if age sometimes means accumulation rather than deterioration? What if stone is the most patient form of awareness in the universe? Better to live with mystery than die with comprehension that invalidates everything you thought you knew. She died 3 weeks after that conversation, her body finally surrendering to the disease she'd fought with the same stubborn determination she'd brought to 3 decades of park service. I attended her funeral in Tucson, where other rangers who'd worked with her shared stories about her dedication and courage. They spoke of her meticulous reports, her willingness to take the most difficult shifts, her calm presence during emergencies. None of them knew about her doubts, her secret theories. The weight she'd carried alone for decades, walking the night patrol while knowing that beneath her feet lay something beyond human comprehension. The weight of having seen truth and choosing silence because the alternative would have been professional ruin and personal disintegration. I continued working night patrol at Petrified Forest, but the job became fundamentally different after everything. After Ava's rescue, after Sager's arrest, after Elena's deathbed confession, I watched the 3 sisters from a distance each night, noting how they looked under moonlight and starlight, how shadows pooled around their bases with an almost liquid quality. I tracked weather patterns and erosion rates with obsessive detail, documenting changes in the formations across seasons and years, photographing them from every angle, measuring distances, recording temperatures at various proximities, building a database of observations that would have made Morris proud, though I understood now that data alone could never capture what was actually happening. And I listened. Not just with ears, but with the awareness my Cherokee grandmother taught me during childhood summers spent in the Oklahoma hills. The awareness that recognizes when a place is speaking, even if its language isn't words. Even if its communication operates on frequencies human ears can't process but human instincts can somehow detect. My grandmother called it listening with the oldest part of yourself, the part that existed before language, before civilization, before humans decided they were separate from and superior to the natural world. The three sisters spoke constantly if you paid attention. In the way wind moved around them, creating eddies and currents that defied meteorological prediction. In the way temperatures shifted near their base, creating microclimates that shouldn't exist in such a flat, exposed area. In the way animals avoided certain areas while crossing the desert at night, making inexplicable detours that added miles to their journeys. Subtle communications that most people missed because they weren't listening with that oldest part of themselves. Because they'd been taught that stone is dead, that consciousness requires neurons, that awareness needs a brain. I also started collecting stories, creating my own archive parallel to the official records. Not official incident reports, but informal accounts from locals, tourists, and other rangers. Anyone who'd spent time near the three sisters and felt something unusual, something they couldn't quite articulate but couldn't quite forget. I recorded these conversations on a digital recorder I kept in my patrol truck, built a database that mirrored what Morris and Elena had done, documenting the pattern without trying to explain it, accepting mystery while refusing to dismiss experience. Some people described seeing lights moving underground, visible through cracks in the stone, blue-green phosphorescence that pulsed with regular rhythm, like breathing. Others heard singing or chanting when the wind was still, voices that seemed to come from beneath their feet, from inside the earth itself. Several reported equipment failures that shouldn't have been possible. Cameras that stopped working despite fresh batteries, GPS units that showed impossible coordinates, placing the user hundreds of miles from their actual location, watches that ran backward, compasses that spun wildly. One elderly Navajo man told me his grandfather called the formations the Watchers and said they guarded something that predated human presence in the region by millions of years. Not evil, he explained carefully, choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood that language shapes understanding and misunderstanding equally. Just other, foreign, operating according to principles we don't have names for. And otherness is dangerous when you don't respect boundaries, not because otherness wants to harm you, but because crossing between different forms of existence carries inherent risk. Like touching a high-voltage wire. The electricity doesn't hate you, it just kills you because that's what happens when incompatible systems meet without proper insulation. 5 years after Ava's rescue, after she'd recovered physically and moved away from Arizona to start a new life she refused to discuss with me, the Park Service commissioned a full geological survey of the Three Sisters area. They brought in teams from 3 universities, ground-penetrating radar, seismic analysis, mineral mapping, chemical composition studies. The goal was to understand the chamber system well enough to prevent future accidents, to finally map the underground spaces that had claimed so many lives. What they found was startling enough that the preliminary reports circulated through Park Service headquarters with an urgency usually reserved for environmental disasters or politically sensitive discoveries. The chambers extended at least 300 feet down, far deeper than anyone had suspected. Far deeper than any natural cave system should exist in that geological formation. They connected to a network of passages that spread beneath much of the southern park, creating a honeycomb structure that shouldn't have survived millions of years of geological pressure and tectonic activity. Some passages showed clear signs of water flow, ancient rivers that had carved through stone over epochs, creating the smooth channels and curved walls characteristic of water erosion. But other passages showed no such signs. They were smooth, yes, but with a different quality. Regular, geometric. Their walls met at precise angles. Their dimensions maintained consistent ratios over hundreds of feet, as if carved deliberately by something other than natural forces, as if designed with purpose and intent. The survey team couldn't explain those passages. Their report spent 40 pages documenting the water-carved sections, fitting them neatly into established geological models. Then 3 pages carefully describing the anomalous passages using passive voice and tentative language, before classifying them as anomalous features requiring further study. The report recommended additional investigation using more sophisticated equipment, recommended bringing in specialists in exotic geological formations, recommended, essentially, that someone else figure out what they'd found because it didn't fit any framework they possessed. Further study was never authorized. Budget constraints, they said. Other priorities, they explained. The report was filed. The equipment was returned. The teams went back to their universities and presumably told themselves that some anomalies just don't matter in the larger scheme of geological understanding. The real reason, I suspected after reading the report through channels I'm not supposed to have, was that some questions don't have answers anyone wants to hear. That some discoveries threaten comfortable narratives about reality too deeply to pursue. Better to leave those particular stones unturned. Better to focus on questions with answers that fit existing paradigms. Better to pretend that 3 pages of geometric impossibility don't invalidate 40 pages of conventional geology. I retired from the Park Service in 2023 after 30 years of night patrols, of watching and waiting and documenting. I took a position teaching wilderness safety at the community college in Holbrook, passing on practical knowledge to young people planning careers in outdoor recreation and natural resource management. Teaching them about proper hydration, navigation techniques, emergency protocols, all the concrete skills that might keep them alive in hostile territory. But I couldn't teach them the deeper lessons. Couldn't explain that some places operate according to rules older than the species teaching them. Couldn't make them understand that respect for wilderness goes beyond environmental ethics into something more primal, more essential. But I still drive out to the desert at night sometimes, parking near the boundary fence and watching the 3 sisters in the darkness. Not on duty, not for any official purpose, just watching. Maintaining a vigil that feels increasingly important as I age, as if someone needs to keep observing them, keep acknowledging their presence, keep maintaining the chain of witnesses that stretches back generations. They haven't changed. Still standing, still watching, still keeping their secrets beneath layers of stone and time. Sager is in prison, serving consecutive life sentences for kidnapping and attempted murder. Alice Thorne's journal is archived in Park Service headquarters, filed under historical documents, personal accounts. Elena Martinez is gone, her confession dying with her except for what I carry forward. But the formations remain, patient as geological time, indifferent to human justice and human documentation, waiting for the next curious person to descend into their chambers, waiting for the next opportunity to remind us that human understanding is small and fragile against forces that predate our species by eons. I think about Ava sometimes, especially during those night vigils, about how close she came to joining the list of people who disappeared into the 3 sisters and never returned. About the voice she heard in her delirium, warning her about what lay below. Was it Alice Thorne's echo, somehow preserved in stone or air? A hallucination produced by dehydration and trauma? Or something else using a human voice to communicate across the boundary between stone and flesh? between ancient consciousness and temporary human awareness? I don't know. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe all three explanations are true simultaneously. Reality being more fluid than our either-or thinking allows. What matters is that Ava survived, that I pulled her out before the desert could claim her, that this one time, against odds, human stubbornness and Cherokee tradition combined to beat the trap that had claimed so many others. But victories in the desert are temporary. The land always takes back what it's owed eventually. Elena knew that. Alice knew that. Every ranger who works nights in hostile territory knows that. We're temporary presences in a landscape that measures time in millions of years. Our patrols and protocols and safety regulations are sand castles built on a beach where the tide always returns. The best we can do is delay the inevitable, document the pattern, warn the next generation, and hope they listen better than we did. Hope they learn from our mistakes without having to repeat them. Hope they maintain the boundaries we've established through costly experience. The three sisters stand tonight under stars that look identical to stars that shone when dinosaurs walked beneath them. They'll stand tomorrow night and 1,000 years of tomorrow nights. They'll watch as the park changes names or ceases to exist, as human civilization rises or falls, as whatever species comes after us discovers the chambers and wonders what they mean. The formations don't care about our narratives or our fears. They're just stone, just markers, just guardians of something deep and cold and patient that doesn't need our understanding to continue existing. Don't need our acknowledgement, don't need our theories. They simply are, in the most fundamental sense of existence, while we briefly were. My Cherokee ancestors taught that everything has spirit. Stone, wind, water, darkness. And spirits have agency, even if that agency operates on timescales and principles alien to human comprehension. I believe that now in ways I didn't when I started this job, ways I couldn't have believed without 30 years of observation and accumulating experience. The three sisters have spirit. The chambers have spirit. And that spirit has been slowly, patiently removing people who intrude too deeply for longer than recorded history. Not maliciously, not consciously in the way we understand consciousness, just automatically. The way a plant closes its leaves when touched. The way water finds cracks in stone. Natural processes that look intentional when observed closely enough. Protection mechanisms operating at the boundary between geology and something beyond geology. This account will join the others. Morris's files. Elena's notes. Alice Thorne's journal. My own decades of observation. A chain of documentation stretching back generations and forward into whatever future awaits. Each generation adding its layer of experience and interpretation. Each witness contributing pieces to a puzzle that may not have a solution, or whose solution may be that puzzles don't always need solving. Maybe someday someone will read these records and understand the pattern we couldn't quite articulate. Maybe they'll have frameworks and instruments we lack. Maybe they'll descend into the cold chamber Alice found and emerge with answers instead of more questions. Or maybe they'll just add their own notes to the archive and pass it forward, continuing the tradition of documenting mystery without solving it, accepting that some questions exist not to be answered but to be asked, generation after generation, keeping alive the awareness that reality contains depths we haven't plumbed. If you're reading this as preparation for your own investigation, I offer this advice. Respect boundaries. The three sisters are marked closed for reasons beyond bureaucracy. Something beneath them doesn't want company. Whether that something is geological hazard or ancient consciousness or both doesn't matter practically. The effect is the same. People who descend into those chambers don't all return. And those who do return changed, carrying memories of cold and darkness, and presences that shouldn't exist but do, carrying knowledge that isolates them from ordinary human experience. You can dismiss this as superstition. You can cite Sager's conviction as proof that all dangers are human-made. You can argue that rational explanations exist for everything I've described, and you might be right. But you'll still be just as gone if the floor gives way beneath you, just as lost if the passages shift and familiar routes become unfamiliar, just as dead if something in the darkness decides you've gone far enough. The night patrol continues. New rangers work the shift now, younger people who don't yet understand what they're watching. They see rock formations. They check fences. They file reports. They haven't yet learned to listen with that oldest part of themselves. They'll learn. The desert teaches everyone eventually, teaches patience and humility and the truth that human knowledge is a candle flame in a universe of darkness. We see what the flame illuminates, never seeing the vast shadow behind us. The three sisters stand in that shadow. They've always stood there. And they'll stand there long after the candle burns out, keeping their vigil over something we were never meant to find. Something that waits in cold chambers deep below the desert floor. Something patient. Something other. Something that remembers when this land was ocean and will remember when it's ocean again. That's what the night patrol taught me over 30 years of watching and waiting. That's what I carry into retirement. A burden and a gift simultaneously. And that's what I pass to you now, whoever you are, reading these words in whatever future awaits. Watch the formations, respect the darkness, and remember that some questions don't have answers because the answers are themselves questions, spiraling down into depths we can't fathom and shouldn't try. Remember that boundaries exist for reasons that transcend human authority. Remember that ancient things operate according to ancient principles. The desert keeps its secrets, but it also keeps its warnings. The marker stones, the sealed chambers, the archived journals. These aren't mysteries to be solved. They're boundaries to be honored. Cross them if you must. But don't expect rescue if you fall. The night patrol can only reach so deep before we too become part of what we're trying to understand. And down there, in the cold and the dark, understanding is indistinguishable from disappearing. That's the final lesson. The one Alice Thorne learned. The one Elena Martinez couldn't share until death freed her from professional obligations. The one I'm passing to you now. The three sisters aren't watching you. They're watching for you, waiting for you. And if you give them the chance, they'll show you exactly why some places should remain unexplored, some stones should stay sealed, and some nights should be spent anywhere except the desert darkness where ancient things wait with patience older than continents.